Just put my phone on mute.
There we go, and I'll hand over to you, Graham.
Okay, thank you everyone. Tuesday 30th of June, Finance, Economic Development, Corporate Services Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Everyone, welcome to the meeting. Can I ask mobile phones switched off first, please, to make sure we don't have any interruptions. And I guess we all know the format of these virtual meetings by now, so I won't go through that again. Before I go into the agenda, I've been asked by several members of the committee to raise the fact that we received a 281-page report 3 business days before this meeting. Now, I think we can all, I mean, it's a very detailed report. There's some excellent stuff in there and there's some excellent detail, but I think we can all agree that it's not ideal receiving such a detailed, such a well-written report in some ways, in many ways, so close to the meeting. And I'd like to invite Karen to comment upon what seems to me to be, I mean, there's a lot more experienced councillors on this call than myself, but this is a perennial problem that seems to have that seems to date back to across all of the chief execs and leaders that we've had in the 6 years I've had here. I'd like to kind of ask her to comment upon what the solution is to this, rather than blame or issues. What's the solution to receiving reports in a more sensible time frame to allow us to review them in a way that they deserve, in fairness, because there's a lot of good detail in here. Karen, can I ask you to comment on that, please? Karen, is the chief executive on the call?
We can barely hear you, Karen. It's not. It doesn't seem to be a very good connection. I've unmuted your microphone, but it seems to be some connection issues.
Okay, so I mean, we're not. Can I ask for a written response? I'd like a written response to this, and rather than a blame response, as I say, I mean, I know that there's a lot of work gone into this report, and as I say, I applaud the committee for pouring through this in the 3 business days they've had. But actually, I think we'd like a written response as to what the solution is to this going forward, because I think we can all agree on this call, on this meeting today, that receiving a very detailed 281-page report 3 business days before the meeting is not acceptable. Actually, Karen is just messaging to say that she would like to speak. Karen, do you want to try again? No, we're not hearing. We're not hearing Karen. So, as I say, can I have that minuted, please? That we would like a written response, and I would like to go into the meeting, please. So, okay, moving to the agenda. Oh, Karen's saying that she's muted. Zena?
Let me just have a look. Bear with me. I had unmuted you, Karen. I'm not sure why you've been muted again. Bear with me. I've unmuted you again. We're having the same issue we were having before. We can tell that you're there. We can hear you, but it's breaking up very badly. We can't make out anything that you're saying, I'm afraid.
We've a lot to cover today, so I think I'd like to move on, and as I say, hopefully we can get that sorted, and perhaps come back for a response. But if not, I think we need a written response to that. Moving on, are there any comments from members of the public?
Chairman, sorry to be rude. Do we need a roll call of members present, please, for the record?
I think we will talk about membership, won't we? Okay, attendance and membership is point 2 on the agenda, Councillor Adams.
Beg your pardon.
So, moving back to the agenda, comments from members of the public. Are there any comments from members of the public? Okay, I'll assume that deathly silence means no, but I shall move on. A register of attendance, membership, and apologies. I'd like to go through the roll call of who's on the call. Councillor Bob Adams.
Present.
Councillor David Bellamy.
I've had apologies from Councillor David Bellamy.
Thank you. Councillor John Dawson.
Present.
Councillor Phil Dilks.
Present.
Councillor Philip Knowles.
Present.
Councillor Charmaine Morgan. Councillor Charmaine Morgan. Okay. Charmaine doesn't appear to be present. Councillor Linda Wotton.
Present, Chairman.
And the Vice Chairman, Councillor Mark Whittington. Councillor Mark Whittington, I think you're on mute.
Yes, sir. I'm here. Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
No problem, and myself, obviously. Are there any other apologies for absence? As I say, that other than the one apology, I believe not. Okay, moving on. Item number 3, disclosures of interest. Do we have any disclosures of interest on the call? Okay, I'll remind everyone that they're able to declare disclosures of interest at any stage during the meeting. But I will move on. Action notes from the previous meeting held on the 26th of May. Has everybody read and reviewed the action notes from the meeting on the 26th of May? Does anybody have any comments?
Mr. Chairman, just one comment. Would it be useful in these minutes, whilst we're on virtual meetings, to actually note in the minutes at the beginning that it was a virtual meeting?
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Dilts. I think that's a good point. If there are no other comments and questions about the action notes from the meeting on the 26th of May, I think we're in agreement that that's an accurate reflection, and therefore I'd like to move on. Updates from the previous meeting. Are there any updates from the previous meeting that you would like to comment upon? Are there any? Yeah. Are there? Okay. Are there any members of the committee that would like to speak on the updates from the previous meeting? No. Okay. We have a comment from Councillor Baxter on the updates from the previous meeting, and he may actually also want to comment on the minutes from the previous meeting. Councillor Baxter.
Hello, Chairman. Yes, I am here. I don't know if it needs to be noted that I'm here, but I am here. On the action notes from the previous meeting, there was a debate about the membership of the Leisure Centre Working Group, in which it was decided that some members would be invited to join a Leisure Centre Working Group. I think I understand that working group structure has been abandoned. Can anybody from the executive confirm that? Secondly, a list of recreation ground assets was owned by parish councils was going to be circulated. I'm not on the committee, so I don't know if that was circulated or not. But if it was, could I have a copy, please? And yeah, and that's that. Thank you.
Okay. Do we have a member of the executive that can comment on that working group?
Chairman, it looks like, Chairman, it looks like that Councillor Barry Dobson is on the call by the look of it. So I don't know whether he's the one to take that, I think.
Councillor Dobson. Councillor Dobson. Okay, I think he may also be having some technical issues, so can I request a written response to both Councillor Baxter and the committee on the question of the working group for the leisure centres? Okay, moving on to your second point. Your second point was the list of assets.
Can I speak, please, on that? Okay.
Knowles, I believe you have an update on that as well. Yeah.
Yeah. In the pre-meeting, I brought it to attention that that wasn't strictly what we wanted. What I asked for was a list of where the SKDC recreational facilities and so on were that stem from a list from 2 or 3 meetings ago. And I've spoken outside the meeting to the Scrutiny officer, and she's going to provide that to us. So that wasn't strictly what we wanted, and perhaps we should note that in the minutes that that's strictly not what we wanted, but the matter is being dealt with now. Thank you.
I believe you've been given it. You should receive that within a couple of days, and I think Councillor Baxter is asking for that to be shared with himself. What information comes back there?
Yeah.
Okay. Are there any other comments from the updates from the previous meeting? No. Then I'd like to move on. Okay. I've changed the agenda running order. In order to make it flow a little bit better, and we've decided to move to item 8 next, which is the financial outturn report. So in your agenda pack, the financial outturn report is pages 199 to 245. I'd like to move to that next, please. This is in the hands of Councillor Stokes and Richard Wiles. Councillor Stokes.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I will introduce and then Richard will go through the report in more detail. So the report in front of you will provide the detail of the provisional outturn position for the financial year 1920, and the report covers the areas of the general fund revenue budget, housing revenue account budget, and the capital programmes general fund and HRA. Within the general fund revenue budget, obviously, we also include the savings and income generation. So all I'm asking the committee is to review the provisional review and capital outturn report and associated appendixes, which there are quite a lot. I will admit there is quite a lot, and then review and recommend to the Governance and Audit Committee the budget carry forwards shown at Appendix E and I, and reserve movements shown at Section 4 and 7 in the report. I'm happy to take questions once Richard has gone through in further detail, but I'll pass over to Richard now. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Stokes. So I'll go through the report as kind of succinctly as I can, because I appreciate there is a lot of detail in the documents, and no doubt members will have questions around particular areas. Probably worth just saying from the outset, this is the 4th financial report the committee has now received during the financial year of 1920. So hopefully members feel relatively well informed as we've gone through this financial year in terms of the improving financial picture that we've been able to present to members during that period. So if we cast our mind back to September 19 meeting, Q1 deficit forecast was just shy of 500,461,000, and during the period in which members rightly raised concerns around that forecast and instigated a number of interventions that should be occurring for this period, both from the Scrutiny Committee perspective, but also from the Cabinet members as well. We've worked within that framework, and we are able to present a provisional outturn position, particularly for the general fund, which is where the pressure was being felt, a balanced position as we've got close to the year end. Just as well, just to make the point that all the information in this report will clearly be subject to audit and will be scrutinised by them as part of their preparations for the statement of accounts. So the information we're presenting to you this afternoon is there for further scrutiny at the appropriate points. Just in terms of the report journey, Councillor Adam Stokes mentioned it's going to Governance and Audit, but along the way it's also going to Cabinet, so it'll be on the Cabinet agenda for the 7th of July. For the Cabinet themselves to go through the information, and then ultimately, in accordance with the terms of reference of Governance and Audit Committee, it will be for the committee to review it on the 13th of August and to approve the carry forwards that are set out in the report. My comment about the carry forwards are clearly within the financial pressures of this financial year. I think members should rightly be scrutinising those carry forwards to satisfy themselves that there are necessities for carrying over budgets into this financial year, because clearly that money could be ring fenced to mitigate some of the pressures we're seeing in this financial year. So I think it's right that the committee just spends a little bit more time than perhaps we would ordinarily expect just to look at those carryovers. So in terms of the headline position, I think Table 1 captures in overall terms what we've seen from both the General Fund and the HRA, from revenue and from capital. Clearly, some areas have performed better than others, but in the main, all of the budgets have delivered either within the budget or underspent overall terms. So overall, I think going into 2021, where we've talked many times about the pressures we're facing, I think the council's got itself into a good position and doesn't need to rely on reserves to plug any particular deficits. It's also true to say that, as mentioned in 2.2 of the report, that we have had a one-off windfall which was attributable to renewable energy receipts from the business rates. The way the business rate system now works is the council is entitled to receive 100% of any renewable energy receipts, and during the year there has been an increase in the renewable energy in the district, particularly around solar panel farms, and those receipts have gone directly to the council. So there is no doubt that that has had a contributory factor to the fact that we've got a balanced position at the outturn. But as at February, we've got a relatively positive position. We're down to 182 forecast overspend, so that clearly has been dealt with through that particular receipt. But also there have been a few minor variances as well. In Table 3, we attempt to show from a summary position what's actually happened at each of the directorate levels. What is relatively confusing, I appreciate, for members, but unfortunately it's the way the accounting information has to be presented. Above the lines in rows 1 to 4, there will be what we call non-cash entries, accounting adjustments, which have to be presented at net service level from an accounting point of view. That does have the effect of slightly distorting some of the variances in rows 1 to 4. So they do have to be stripped out because they're non-cash items. They can't have an impact on the taxpayer, and therefore on line 6 they are taken out to get a truer position of what's happened at the net cost of service. But when you delve into the appendices, we've attempted to separate out those non-cash items away from the controllable variances. So the way the variances are laid out in the appendices, you'll see a separation between those non-cash entries, which are largely around pension and capital valuation changes. You'll see those are removed from the more cashable, controllable elements. Positively, the general fund income streams have performed very well during the year. Probably worth making the point as well that this financial year only really had about 7 days worth of COVID-19 impact. So we've talked many times about the impact on the income. This was largely immune from that, and I think in our May meeting we did talk about some of the impact in the 1920, but it was relatively modest in the scale of this. I think it was about £40,000. So out of a budget of 5.6 and an outturn of 5.4, it was immaterial in terms of the impact it had. So overall, the income streams across the board have performed very well, only a 4.4% variance compared to budget, which I think is very good, given the volatility of those areas generally and the size of those budgets that we're monitoring. And we've attempted to break that into a chart for you, just so visually you can get a better sense of how the income and the budgets performed alongside each other. In terms of capital, both capital programmes have delivered a very low outturn compared to budget, but they've each got their own reasons for doing so. In terms of the general fund, the main element was a very early decision by Cabinet to pause on the growth and investment programme. Members may recall that in the previous year there was a £10 million fund set up to identify and procure particular commercial investment opportunities as they came forward in the district. For a period of time, they weren't visible to the council, but in the latter part of 1920, the conscious decision was taken not to use that money, but to ring fence it to contribute towards the leisure programme, which at that time was developing as a new ambition. So rather than cause any financial difficulties to deliver the leisure programme, the decision was taken to pause that investment on commercial. So clearly a £10 million budget was at that point slowed down, and that's why we're seeing such a large distortion on the outturn compared to the budgets. Probably worth mentioning as well, on the general fund capital programme, a lot of the reserves have been used to fund that programme, which have had an impact on the balances, and the largest element has been the local priority reserve. So that's our big revenue reserve. The council is very low and running low on capital reserves, so to head off the need to externally borrow, which still has a carry cost greater than using our internal reserves, the local priority reserve has taken quite a hit in terms of how we've funded the programme. You'll see that in paragraph 4.3, a breakdown of how the reserve has been used, and in the appendices you'll see in greater detail the balances from the reserves from an outturn position compared to the brought forward at the start of the financial year, so members can see how that's moved across. That's particularly relevant in this financial year because clearly revenue reserves are going to be our go-to place in the event of the council not being able to balance the budget for this financial year. Revenue reserves will be where we'll need to find some resources to fund that. But all the reserves are laid out and members can see side by side how they've been used during the year. The one that's still a provisional figure at the moment is the working balance, which at the moment is down at 2.7. We're still waiting for the pooling for the Lincolnshire business rate pool to be finalised. Members will be aware that government have extended timelines for the outturn, and therefore the pooling returns have not yet been finalised from a Lincolnshire perspective. So we're hoping and optimistic there will be some positive return from the pooling gain from being part of the Lincolnshire pool, but that information hopefully will be with us in the next few weeks. From an HRA perspective, performed relatively well during the financial year. Just for members' understanding, we deliberately budget for a surplus for the HRA. That's in accordance with a 30-year business plan that the HRA has to have following self-financing. So all the budgets are set in a way that create a surplus, and that surplus goes into the reserves to fund the Decent Homes capital programme. So it does look a little bit peculiar when you look at the general fund, which has to balance. The HRA is able to create surpluses, and indeed the budgets are positioned in a way to enable that. So again, that's helping fund the capital programme, and particularly with the ambitions on the new house build programme that's in the budgets from this year going forward. 60 million has been agreed over 3 years. Those surpluses are very useful to fund the programme. Unfortunately, the HRA, in terms of performance of the capital programme, didn't deliver the programme as was set out. So the budget was 16.5, the outturn was 7.1, so an overall unspent of £9.4 million, largely around the new build and stock growth delivery plan, which has been redeveloped and now is more down for delivering from this financial year going forward. Fortunately, that hasn't particularly compromised the authority because we used reserves in the main to fund that programme. It just means that we've had to put a lot of investments on short-term investments because we were expecting the build-out rate to happen in that financial year. So there would have been a slight adverse impact of keeping all our investments on short-term, but actually the percentage rates between short and long aren't particularly material enough to cause any particular difficulty. But clearly there's an intrinsic link between the investment programme of the council and the cash flow management, treasury management activity of the council as well. So, and if they're out of step, it can cause some difficulties. Again, the reserves are set out for the HRA in the appendices. Just to help members kind of grapple with the appendices, I appreciate there's 10 of those. Appendix A and B are largely general fund revenue general fund capital and carry forwards are in D and E, and the reserves for general fund are in F. So A to F deal with the general fund. G deals with the HRA summary and variances. H deals with the capital program for the HRA. I is the carry forwards, J is the reserve. So the structure is exactly the same. We thought it'd be more helpful to position the general fund in the HRA as two distinct set of appendices. So members hopefully can follow these sequential order depending on which part of the fund they want to deal with. So if I leave it there, Mr. Chairman, obviously happy for myself and Councillor Stokes to answer any questions as necessary.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for that, Richard. Okay, so I'm going to cycle through members. I have a polite request not to do them alphabetically because it always picks on the same person to go first. So I'm going to mix this up this time. So if I can start, please, with Councillor Philip Knowles. Philip Knowles, do you have any comments and questions on this report? I think in terms of structure, by the way, I think that what we should do is that I think that we need to review we need to separate out points 1 and 2 here. I think we'll come back and look at the recommendations in a separate round of questioning. So let's just focus on reviewing the provisional revenue and corporate and capital outturn reports associated with the general fund and the housing revenue account first, and then we'll come back to the carry forwards if that's okay, just so that we can try and break this down. Councillor Knowles, can I ask you to start, please?
Oh, what a good choice. Right, first of all, can I mention that this report, the outturn position report, was signed off on the 16th of June. Now, there was no reason why we shouldn't have had this report before we got the total minutes, so that we would have more time to look at it. You know, we had 2 days effectively to go through an extremely complicated document, which takes in the whole of last year. I've one general comment really, and that is that it was agreed. It was Richard agreed that at one of the early meetings that some of the ambition on savings for the budget were unrealistic. These were the words he used, and that the budget requirement for 2021 would be more realistic. It seems to me very important that as we now look at an amendment, seriously look at an amendment to 2021 budget, we don't go back to any situation where we just finance any shortfall by optimistic, ill-defined savings. I'll ask a question of Richard, if I may. You have a financial responsibility as Chief Financial Operator, weighing above the Cabinet and the Council, not to agree to anything that you feel might be detrimental to the Council itself. Am I right in thinking that? Just like a Chief Financial Officer at a Town Council cannot let the council do things that are not wise or not prudent. Have you got the same responsibility towards the total budget?
Yeah, I have the same statutory responsibilities, yes.
And in that situation, you know, where we got things in which were just ambitious hopes, can you make sure that they are not repeated when we come to the September amendment on the current budget?
I mean, if I can just on that point, Mr. Chairman, and Councillor Knowles is right, we have talked about this at several of the meetings, and I think just to give a level of reassurance, the budget as laid out in Appendix C is a 1.9 million programme of savings, efficiencies, transformation, all listed out, and we've talked several times about that. And the reassurance I can give members is that 2021, bear in mind this was pre-COVID, had £1 million in it. So already it was half what the previous year had got in it. Since the COVID, we've reported to members our most likely scenario around the savings and transformation is 500,000. So we've been very upfront to say that £1 million programme, albeit it was half of the previous year, we still have concerns that that £1 million programme is going to be problematic. So our modelling is based on a 500,000. Now, obviously, the work going on is to ensure we still can meet that million. It may be in different elements of the programme. It may not be exactly the same programme as set out when we went to the March Council, but nevertheless, we've been prudent and only assuming £500,000.
Yeah,
so it's 20. So effectively, it's 25%, if you like, of the one that we're talking about today.
Yep, I appreciate that, and I'm just making sure that we don't drift off in an amendment to the budget to make the balance, that we go back to a sort of hopeful, pious hopes that we get some savings from somewhere, but we're not quite sure where, in order to balance what is going to be a difficult situation going forward from September.
Councillor Stokes has asked to comment on that as well, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I mean, the savings that we put forward last year were ambitious. I wouldn't say they were impossible, they're ambitious. But going forward, obviously, the COVID has had a major impact, and the budget that we brought forward to the council in September will be extremely realistic and targets that we will want to hit and will hit. We've got to be very realistic with the current situation that we're in as a country as well as a council. Thank you.
Councillor Knowles, if I can ask you to continue.
No, I'm okay now, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I would like to move on. I think we will come back to savings. I'll just carry on through the list. Councillor Linda Wotton. Councillor Linda Wotton.
Thank you, Chairman. I like to look at things very simply. I've just got questions on the disabled facilities grants, because on page 215 it quotes that I'll read what it says. Private sector housing disabled facilities grant specific costs incurred under this heading related to capitalism of salaries 74k, resulting in a revenue underspend. Somewhere else I see it as 63k, and on another page it comes up, can't find it at the moment, Chairman, 680 something.
Page 227, Chairman, if that helps, Linda.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that, Philip. Yeah, it comes up 797, 665, at a variance of 132. If somebody could explain to me what that means, please. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you for the question. The disabled facilities grants are predominantly funded through capital. So the way the budgets are prepared is the revenue costs of the staff involved in delivering the programme are charged to the revenue account, and the capital costs of the works themselves are charged to the general fund capital programme. What we were able to do through the permitted legislation is actually put some of the salary budgets to capital as well. So we were able to take some pressure off the revenue budgets by charging them to the capital programme. So the comment in line 215 is effectively saying that the salary budgets that we put in the revenue budget, we could charge to the capital programme. So effectively line 215, page 215 then goes into the outturn position on page 227. So ostensibly what we've tried to do and been able to do through that legislation is maximise those capital budgets by charging the salary budgets to it.
Thank you for that, Richard. Thank you, Chairman. And if I may just ask another question, Chairman, please. I noticed the fit out for the Savoy Cinema. We had an email notifying us that there was a one-off payment for that, which was, off the top of my head, perhaps 647, something like that. And then there's also the university. I think that was 37 something. And I believe I've seen another quote that it was 6 something. Can just Richard enlighten me on that one, please, Chairman? Thank you.
So yes, there's been several elements of funding that have been used to bring together the Savoy and the associated development of that site. So there was a one-off payment made to Savoy, which I think was identified in the previous meeting from recollection. I think it was identified that was a one-off fit-out contribution towards the cinema itself, which was part of the lease arrangement with Savoy. So effectively, Savoy procured the fit-out of the 5 screens, and the council reimbursed Savoy directly on receipt of evidence of how that money was utilised. And then over and above that, we funded the university fit out of the first floor, again as part of the arrangements for bringing that asset back into use, and that's referenced actually on page 205 as the reserve. The local priority reserve has been used to fund the university fit out, and that work's actually underway at the moment, as members may have seen if they've gone past that way. So yes, there's several elements to how that particular asset has been brought into use.
Thank you very much for the explanations, Richard, and thank you, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, moving on. Councillor Adams.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Can I just refer back to the comments you made about the time that members have had to look at this very lengthy report, 280 odd pages. You say 3 working days. For some of us, that was even less, Chairman, because yesterday I was pretty well tied up on my planning and site visits and other matters to do with planning, and I actually didn't get to look at these papers until Sunday afternoon. And so I'm a little bit concerned, Chairman, that perhaps the work programme for this committee has not been fine-tuned so that there is a progression of reports coming forward. And I am very reluctant, Chairman, to do anything other than, on the whole of the thing, to abstain from voting, because quite honestly I haven't fully digested it. But going on to the specific report that which is before us, can I ask it for explanation? On page 203, it refers to line 10 in the revenue outturn position, and it talks about depreciation being charged on services. Now that puzzles me. I know it's many years since I was in accountancy, but I always thought depreciation was charged on assets, physical assets, and not on services. How far wrong am I, Richard, please?
You're absolutely right. The depreciation is a charge against the asset. What line 10 description is trying to say is that depreciation is charged at the cost of service lines 1 to 4. When I was presenting, I was trying to explain that lines 1 to 4 on table 3 will include not what I would call non-cash items, which we will distort in some extent those variances that you'll see at the far right column. So line 10 explanation is trying to demonstrate that those depreciation costs are sitting in rows 1 to 4, which will have the effect of slightly distorting the variances, but they are removed at line 6 because line 6 and line 10 as they're non-cash items. I'm sorry, it's not. Sorry, it's not clear. So you're definitely on the right lines.
Well, thank you for that explanation, Richard. It helps, but it's also confusing, because when I did look at this report, I'm looking at sort of pages where they start. I'm then having to refer to and from appendices, etc., to try and get my head around everything that is in them. And I'm sure the information is factual, but I would have thought, Chairman, there was a more simplified way of presenting this to laymen. I'm sure SIPFA people and FCAs, etc., will grasp it straight away, but I think we need to understand that many of the councillors are lay people. This goes into the public domain, and I don't think it is helpful. You talked earlier about engaging with the public, etc., and I don't really think this is a helpful way of doing it. I'm not saying it's not been done before in this way, but sometimes these things come back to and hit you and think, well, hang on, how is this taking up with the general member of the public? Can I go on to page 205, Chairman, where it talks about local priority reserves, which have been funded? Perhaps Richard might comment on what income we might expect to receive in future years from these investments? Is that calculated, or is that something that is taken into account in the budget as it will be amended? I don't know. That might be an unfair question at this stage, Chairman, but it's possibly something that we need to be looking at. I'm sure, Chairman, that there is nothing untoward with these figures, but I do have problems with the way they're presented, my understanding of them, the time we were given, etc. And I think I probably will vote, but it will be very reluctantly, and I hope that we can see a proper work programme for this committee that dovetails into Cabinet and to Council. I mean, we've got this massive report coming forward on the future of high streets, Chairman, which I wonder why, if it's already gone to Cabinet before it's come to us. It's just part of this process I find a little bit concerning.
I will just cut across you there. I mean, our work plan has been published for the year, Councillor Adams, and so this will have been in the work plan. This will have been in the work plan for a while. Just bringing you back to this report, if you'd like to comment on some of those points, Richard.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, we're always striving to make these reports more accessible, because clearly you can see from the amount of work that's gone in, we need to make sure that people can pick it up, digest it, understand it. One of the attempts we did make was to push all the detailed analysis to the back in the appendices to make the actual covering report detailed enough that if it's just read in its entirety without the appendices, it gives members the information, and indeed any other stakeholders, the overview that for most people that is kind of what they're looking for. But we would welcome more feedback and views to members of how we can continue to shape this. We do routinely benchmark our reports with others, and there is no perfect model, clearly, as members will want information in slightly different ways. But you know, I don't take that as negative criticism. I think we need to refine and develop the reports to make sure that members can access the information that they want to. So I do welcome feedback in that way. In terms of the reserves, the local priority reserve, which we have talked about a few times this morning, the investments that have been, and I think if Councillor Adams is perhaps referring to where we've used it to fund particular assets such as the cinema, the university and things like that, then where there is a return coming from those, then yes, they will be built into the budgets for 2021 and beyond. But clearly, like everything else in that budget, they are under pressure. Savoy's not been open at all this financial year, so clearly there will be some implications, and those investments for the short term at least could be under some risk.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll leave it there.
Moving forward, Councillor Dawson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mine's a simple question because I'm a little bit ignorant, and it's to do with Table 4, page 202, that we've told us in the accounting adjustment where we've taken 3.5 million, which looks like it's on the profit side, out of the budget. I don't know where it came in the budget, because you read that you can't see it's come in. And the other thing is, you've got an asset revaluation. Well, what do we revalue? What's gone up 1.644 million? And you know, you look at it and it's sort of a little bit cloudy. It is for me, as I'm not an accountant, and you know, to me, you sort of. I own a few properties, and we're very reluctant to put our properties up because it costs you more money, and normally when you put them up, you're trying to do a little bit of a smoke screen for the bank. But it's which assets and why do we put them up, and so whereabouts in the balance sheet does this figure that we're taking out go in for a start? It must have gone in. This 3.5 million must have gone in somewhere. You can't really see where it's come in, but you can see where it's come out, which helps to balance the book. So perhaps I'm a bit cynical. Thank you.
No, let me just clarify your question there, Councillor Dawson. You're asking for a detailed breakdown of the removal of the accounting adjustments and a detailed breakdown of the valuation adjustments. Is that right?
Yeah, because it's a substantial sum of money, isn't it? It's, if you actually look at that line, which again, councils do it in a peculiar way. it shows that it's basically a profit, or it's money that you can deduct off your costs. It doesn't show where these originally came in on your costs, but it shows them going out on your costs. And why have what's happened with the assets? Why have we suddenly revalued them by 1.644 million? On what basis and what were they?
Can you comment on that and confirm that that information is available, Richard?
Yes, it certainly is available. I mean, and to kind of reassure members, that line 6, the accounting adjustment removal of 3.5, is not to remove any surplus or adverse variance. It's actually neutralising the entries that are sitting above it. As I mentioned in my introduction, lines 1 to 4 will include in the outturn the 3.5 million within those outturn figures. So the reversal of it is just to take them out to neutralise them. As I said in the report introduction, the objective of that being that there is no impact then on the taxpayer, because it would otherwise distort our balances. So the 3.5 is just taking out entries that have gone in above the line. The revaluations are actually done by the Valuation Office Agency. They're not done by the officers at the council. They're done from an independent valuation perspective, and they're to offset fluctuations in the market. We will have a rolling programme of our assets that are revalued by the Valuation Office to reflect market conditions. So that's actually a valuation loss. So there'll be some particular assets sitting in our asset register that the Valuation Office has reduced the value of, and therefore our depreciation and valuations will need to be offset by that same amount. So it is largely a paper exercise. It's actually just taking out changes that the Valuation Office is putting in our assets through valuation changes, but it is only neutralising entries that are going in above the line. It's not having any effect on our balances at all.
Yeah. I think the way I understood that, I think Councillor Dawson accepts that, but I think that they're big enough numbers to require a breakdown.
We can certainly provide that.
So if we can minute that, they'll be available. Councillor Dawson, do you have any other questions, or did that answer your question?
No, that was, most people have asked all the questions. That was just something that worried me, that we appear to have up to valuation. It seems an opposite way to what Richard has just said, that we've actually shown 1.644 million, which isn't money. You know, it's a thing that goes up and down, but it isn't actual cash. You can't go and spend it, and that's the thing that worries me. It looks on the balance sheet as if it's cash, but it isn't cash. It's a thing that could tomorrow be worth half or twice as much. So it does worry me on those sort of figures. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So if more information can be provided on those and the processes around those, that would be helpful. Do you have any other questions, Councillor Dawson?
No, that's fine. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Dilks.
He indicated he's left the meeting, Chairman.
Okay. 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 So I'm going to move on. Councillor Dilks seems to have left the meeting. Okay. So my comments. Well, first of all, on the positives. I mean, I remember when I first started as a councillor, there are considerably more experienced councillors on this call than myself. But when I started, we used to receive a lot less detail. Getting more detail now, and I welcome that. I'm grateful for Adam pushing accounting staff for more detail. I'm grateful for Richard for providing more detail, and I'm grateful for Richard taking questions on all of the detail. So I welcome the detail. Like Bob, I have some concerns about the fact that we were only given 3 days to review this. You mentioned that you're striving to make the report accessible. Obviously, detail is great, and I am a detail person, so I like that. However, I think we are failing to meet the objective of making these reports accessible. Now, I think everyone might be. We're at least getting detail, but frankly, it took me several hours to go through this report. And I think if a member of the public picked this report up and looked through it, I think that they wouldn't be able to. Now, I don't think that, as I say, I think there have been improvements in this council, but I think we need to do more in this, and I think that needs to be given a lot more thought. And I would welcome committee members. I mean, even simple ideas like having the general fund and the HRA as separate reports. That would be a massive improvement. Just literally having them as separate reports, throwing them together. I can see why you do that for accounting outturn purposes, but throwing them together makes it fantastically confusing. The 10 appendices. I agree that sometimes we will need appendices, but I think that's too many. I think some of these tables could and should have gone within the report. So, as I say, I welcome the detail. I welcome the fact that Richard certainly seems to be on top of his brief and in answering these questions, and I think that's great. But I still think we are, and I don't think, maybe you're right, maybe nobody's able to do this, but I still think we're failing in the objective of making these accessible, and I think we need to do more. And I know that Adam's working hard to try and do that, but I think that there are simple things that we can do to improve the presentation of these and make it more digestible. So I'll move. I just want to register that comment because I think we do need to do more. These reports are extremely challenging for this committee, forget the members of the public.
Mr. Chairman, before you move on, I do apologise. I dropped out, technical problem, and I've only just got back in. I did have a couple of questions, if I may.
Councillor Dilts, I will return to you, but I've started, so I'll finish. They say. I will return to you. But as I say, my first point is that I welcome the additional information, but we're not achieving the objective of making these accessible to the public. I probably will split my comments into two. First of all, I'd just like to ask you, this has been a challenging year for budgeting, I think is probably the diplomatic way of saying that. Adam and Richard, can I ask, give us lessons from, I mean, there are budgets that have been missed, there are budgets that have been exceeded, there are budgets that have been underspent. Separating it out into both the general fund and the housing revenue account, tell me, can you explain to me what you think are the key lessons from the budgeting process this year that we should take away from this? Please, Richard, if you can start there, I'll save other questions.
Okay, do you want me to go first or Councillor Stokes? I don't mind which.
Richard, can I ask you to go first, please?
Yeah. Okay. I mean, if you kind of stand back and look into this this financial year that we're looking at this morning, I think it's clear where there has been particular difficulties, and you scratch the surface of those difficulties. You'd probably look at, was the project management properly in place? Was there proper plans for execution of these? And particularly around savings, the transformation, the capital programs, there were a number of proposals put forward that unfortunately couldn't be delivered in a timely way, and we need to reflect on the accuracy of putting these proposals forward. Were they oven ready? Because for us, from an accounting point, 1st of April this starts, so every day that passes after the 1st of April, that target or that saving or that transformation budget delivery is becoming more difficult because the days are ticking by. So it's kind of making sure that before any of these proposals go forward, we've got those plans in place, we've got that project management in place, and that'll vary. That needs to vary because it needs to be tailored to the size, because clearly some of these are relatively small budget areas, but clearly some are huge. £10 million unspent on HRA would suggest there weren't plans in place. Was the planning there? Was the outline planning in place? Was the contract procurement in place? Were all those areas? So I think there's a real big lesson learnt around that. And the other thing, which hopefully through this year we have demonstrated to the committee, is really good close budget monitoring, so we can give you really timely information that enables us to be able to react as a council to where problems are forthcoming, rather than just looking back, which is kind of what we're doing now. We're looking back rather than looking forward. So the history's already happened. We can't do anything about it. All we can do is learn from it. But I think better management and monitoring of it and reporting that in a more timely way will enormously help, because the mitigations and the actions can be implemented and delivered against, rather than leaving it too long that you can't then address it. So that's kind of my sense of it. I think when we look across Lincolnshire and we talk to our colleagues, clearly as well there are different ways of doing this. There are different practices, and I go back to the point about reports. I've looked at other reports, as I'm sure the members may have done as well. They vary quite greatly, but you make some good points about breaking it out into different parts. I'm quite a fan of using visuals as well to help members quickly see how the funding is made up, how we finance particular things, where those variances are, and just using simple visuals is a good way of being able to do that as well. So I think there's loads of positives in the year, but we need to make sure those lessons are learned and carried into this year particularly, but going forward as well. I don't know if Councillor Stokes has got anything to add.
Yes, I will come in on that. Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I mean, the one thing I would say, we are an ambitious council, and I don't apologise for that, because I think we all got the ambitions to get the council to a different level and to create things for the district. I mean, and to achieve these ambitions, we do need to finance them. And yes, some of the savings that we put in last year were ambitious. I've learned that we need to probably we need to tone them down a little bit. But overall, I would stick to being ambitious. I mean, we are, and we want to achieve great things in this district. And as Richard said, as Richard put it quite well, we are learning lessons as we go along, and we will continue to learn lessons. But I don't want to change the way this council is going, because that's the direction we have to travel. We want to continue. Thank you, Chairman.
I think there are some good points in that response that I'll be looking for in the minutes. Actually, I think it's. I appreciate that we're an ambitious council, but at the same time, we need to make sure that these reports can be understood and digested by the electorate, and I think that more work needs to be done on that. I will come back to my other questions because I think, as I say, I prefer to allow committee members to go first. So, Councillor Dilks, if I can allow you to drop in here, please.
Sorry, Chairman, can I just come in a moment? I see that the Chief Executive would like to comment on your first point.
Oh right. Sorry. You mean on the availability of the agenda, Karen? Okay, Karen, can we unmute Karen? Karen is unmuted. Okay, I think Karen must be still having some technical issues. I'll come back to Karen again once we're after this agenda item to kind of come back to that.
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh,
no.
Oh, okay. Karen, yes.
Can you hear me this time?
We
yes.
can.
Yes, Councillor Jill?
Yes, I can. Karen.
Good morning.
Morning.
I'm having terrible Wi-Fi problems here out in the villages. Thanks for letting me come back in. Sorry I wasn't able to speak earlier. I think, yeah, going forward, I think it's really important that we get timely information out to members, and having over a 200-page pack is I can imagine being quite a feat to try and get through with some of the detailed reports that Richard certainly has presented in the high streets. It's certainly been something that we've picked up as a corporate management team over the last month. I understand there's been frustrations for many years at South Kesteven with reports. But this pack, it was, and we need to understand, electronically, it was available from Monday the 22nd of June. It was posted by Democratic Services on that day, so members would have been able to access it other than the pink papers, which there wasn't too many on the pack. But you're right, the hard copy didn't come out to you till, I think it was Wednesday, Thursday last week, wasn't it? So the problem that was caused by was a couple of late reports, and of course we were closed on the Tuesday, so we couldn't print. So once we get back to a printing service that is able to support committee agendas, then I do hope, and my aspiration is, that you get timely information as a minimum with 5 days clear notice.
Okay. I welcome those comments.
Yeah.
Okay. without wanting to break the flow on this,
Yes.
I think we can return to comments on that separately outside of this. But thank you very much for coming in on that. Councillor Dills, can I ask you to return to the outturn position, please?
Yes, indeed, and thank you to the Chief Executive for those comments. I think we're all conscious of what's happened, what we've got in front of us. This massive report. I was up, and I'm sure we all were. I think I looked at the clock, and it was 1:30 in the morning when I'd finally. I think I must have dozed off, but there we are. Thank you. I think all of my questions actually are on the same page, and it is page 227. And they are pretty detailed on the I think Councillor Linda Wootton raised the disabled facilities grant. But my question on that is, why did we not manage to spend £132,000 that was available and needed by people? Because clearly we had the applications that were approved within the year, and they've been rolled over to the present year. And I just wondered, Richard, if you could just give a little bit of clarity on this unspent amount of the 132,000. Says it will be held in reserve towards future works, but then the final sentence of that paragraph in the variance comment says funding for all grants approved last year will be charged to this year's grant allocation. I know it's a long-running problem that we've had. It comes up, year on year, the inability for us to actually spend this money that's available. And I actually would like to see some year on year figures, if I could, on, am I right in my sense that we're not spending it year on year? Do you want me to go on? I've got two other questions. I'm happy just to throw them in now. I think Richard would be able to answer them. One is on the... sorry, Chairman.
I think this is such a complicated report that I think we should get a response to each one separately, please. Yeah.
Thank you.
Richard.
Yeah. Sorry. So thanks for that. I mean, hopefully Councillor Dilks would agree that this is certainly improved from what we've seen in previous years. The variance underspend in this area has been quite large in previous years. So actually, in proportionate terms, the 132 variance is relatively modest to what we've seen. Rest assured that money will not be lost, and it will not be returned to any agency. That money will be now committed by the authority to deal with 2021 programme, and I think what the report's trying to say is that the work wasn't actually delivered in 1920, but the commitment to do the work was made. So therefore, that 132 will simply be rolled across into 2021 and will be spent in 2021. So no DFD money underspends that we've had in previous years has ever been lost. It's all being held, and actually in the reserve statement, it's under a heading of housing. I think it's under a heading of housing delivery. So actually the money is there, and we have had difficulties, as members will recall in the past, in terms of some of the referrals not coming through in a very timely manner, even though the demand was there. That process has massively improved. So the legacy underspends from the previous years will be now brought forward and accelerated, and hopefully in this year we'll see not only the current programme being delivered, but also we can start using some of those underspends from previous years as well to deal with that demand. So no money has been lost, and the demand will be met.
Thank you for that, Richard. Yeah, thank you. I mean, these are improvements that make big changes to people's lives, and I think we're all sort of concerned when we see the underspend. But thank you. I hope we can get better this year. And obviously, with the COVID, I assume that there's delays, as there is in everything, in getting that done. So we'll probably have to pull out the stops later in the year. I'll move on, if I may, though, to two relatively simple points. One is on the Savoy one-off payment. Was that extra money that we went over and above the budget that we'd already put in for the cinema, if I can put it that way, if you understand what I'm saying? And secondly, a minor point on the same page, the vehicle electric charging points. I appreciate that COVID has meant that they've been delayed. Do we have a date yet when they will be up and running? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. On the Savoy you'll be aware that that particular project was brought back to council on a number of occasions as the ambition and the size of that project changed, such as the public realm being the last proposed change that was made. So the Savoy contribution was always within the remit of that project, and it was felt that Savoy as the specialist would have access to supply chains around the fit outs, specific requirements that you would need for the cinema to be operationally successful. So when the council last approved the amended budget, that item was included. So it wasn't in any way an overspend of the project. It was always within scope. The change was made that Savoy would be better placed as specialists to procure, and we would, as the council, would reimburse them upon satisfactory receipt of evidence of how and what they spent that money on. Unless there's anybody else on the call, that's one answer I can't give. I don't know when those electric points are going live. I know they're in. But I honestly don't know. I'm just looking at the names. I don't know if there's any other officer on the call who can, sorry, at the meeting who could answer that. But if not, we could get you that information.
That's fine, Richard. Thank you for that.
Can I just request a written response to that, please? I would like to move on, if Councillor Dilks's points are fine.
Finished. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Whittington, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I tend to sort of share some of the general comments that have been made by other councillors regarding the sort of, these are fairly complex report. I've got the benefits of, as members of the committee know, of having been an accountant for over 30 years, and it is a little bit tricky, some of it, to work through. I think I managed to work through it all. In terms of the general comment that's been made about trying to find ways of perhaps simplifying to make them not so simplification but accessibility, is it worth, Mr. Chairman, seeing if a member from this committee or perhaps a couple of members from this committee could maybe work with Richard and Councillor Stokes to maybe look to sort of find ways to
just to step in on that, I would welcome that. I think that could be done outside of this meeting.
Yes, I agree.
Anything that makes these accounts more accessible.
Yes, I agree, Mr. Chairman. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, we can put comments together, and as I say, if you can take comments, Mark, I'm happy for you to lead that process of making these more accessible.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I say, other than that, I've got no specific questions because I've been able to work through them. But as I say, even for me, and not saying I'm the world's greatest accountant, but experience, and it takes time, shall we say? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you for that. So just to wrap up. As I say, presentation. Mark is going to reach out in an attempt to make these more accessible. I do have a couple of questions and some items that I think we've heard come up several times today that I think that we should look for more detail rather than a quick response. If I can just go through the accounts. Yeah, I mean, it may be that I think the local priorities reserve, I think this is something I'd like to see on the work plan. It's something that Richard raised in his presentation. It's something that's been raised by questions. I think that the variances and the amount of money spent on the local priorities reserve is something that I think this committee probably ought to scrutinise a little bit more, and so I think I'd like to add that to the work plan, please. So if that could be minuted. Just a couple of other points in your a couple of other things as well, adding to the work plan. There was a major expenditure difference, 44% expenditure difference in the growth portfolio. I think this committee needs to try and learn lessons from that, and I think that I would like to see that added to our work plan, why that was so different, and also transformation and change on pages 222 and 202. There was quite a the budgets were a way off. I'd like to see that added to the work plan, so that we can understand and learn lessons from that. I also think that we should add to our work plan the use of reserves. The way we use reserves and the way we access reserves is something that I'm not clear on. And again, if we add that to our work plan, we can try and understand that better as a committee. Loans to private entities. I'd like Richard to comment on this. I've never seen scrutiny of the loans to Gravitas and ESK from a council perspective. They're referred to on pages 206 and 229. I'd like to see what our sign-off process is for those loans and how we go about those loans. Again, I'll ask for a comment, but the reality is I think that requires more scrutiny. And I think loans to all private entities, there must be a process around those, even though they are council projects. This is taxpayers' money at the end of the day. We should have a process around that. Savings is something that's been raised 2 or 3 times by a couple of members here. There has to be lessons around the savings process. I welcome Richard's comment on that. I won't ask him to comment again on that, other than to say that I think that adding to our work plan how we go about looking for savings and how we achieve them, what are the lessons from last year, what are we going to ask for next year. I actually think that would be a useful report on our work plan, so if that can be minuted. Richard referred to a 30-year business plan for the housing revenue account. Is that a formal document? I've not seen that document. I'd like to understand that document. If Richard can comment on that, I'd like to understand that. 30-year business plans, in my experience, generally don't last 30 years. So I'd like to know when was that last reviewed, and does he think that should be on our work plan? I would suggest, unless that's been reviewed in the last couple of years, it would be interesting to see some of that. I mean, I actually think what I'd like to see accompanying a document from like this is lessons from this. I think all of these appendices tell us lessons, and I think that we're getting the detail now, which is great, because that's a big improvement in the last 5 to 6 years. And as I say, I pay tribute to Richard and Adam for getting us more detail. The presentation, as I say, I've got concerns with that. The final stage in this process is taking lessons from that detail and implementing them. We're not there yet in the level that I would hope for. And I think I'd like to see each of these appendices should have an accompanying document. What are the lessons from each of those that we can learn from for future budgeting rounds? And to be honest, actually, I suppose I would like Richard and Adam to go through these one by one and just answer what are the lessons from each of these appendices. Yeah, what are the lessons from each of these? If you can comment on the points I've made now, please, Richard, and I'll come back again.
Yeah, I mean, I note your comments about work plan items being brought forward to delve deeper into some of these variances. I mean, as I said right at the outset, this is a provisional outturn, so it's unlikely, but some of these numbers may vary slightly by the time we get to an audited outturn, because we're still, as you know, from the changes to regulations, we're not at the normal position we'd expect to be, because normally we'd have the draft accounts done by the end of May. We've got extensions, as you know, so some of this is still moving a little bit. So absolutely, it's about lessons learned, and particularly relevant as we go into the next financial year. It'll only be the other side of the summer break that we'll be looking at 2021 in the medium-term plan. So there's inevitably, you can't disconnect the outturn from going forward, because there are elements in this which will be relevant to future years, because some of these are an ongoing project or their ongoing budget. So clearly we need to understand the difficulties we've experienced in some of these areas and how they may impact on the future. Similarly, where we've got underspends, yet the services have been able to deliver, we need to understand whether those budgets were fit for purpose and are fit for purpose going forward. So we talk about zero basing, and we talk about whether or not there can be elements of these budgets that could be stripped back and reallocated elsewhere. So I think they're all valid points, and we need the time to be able to distill what this is telling us and how we can put that into a meaningful programme for the committee to look at as part of its budget preparations, which I say will be starting in September, October time in any event. So I think hopefully Zena's captured those as part of work plan items, and we can bring those back to you. In terms, sorry, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, just to comment on that. So as I say, Zena's commented on those. Mark and I will prioritise those, and we do need a deeper dive on some of these as you've described. On the lessons, I mean, I think I would like a more considered response than that, and I think that it would be useful to receive a written considered response on the lessons from each of these areas from yourself and Adam. So rather than have you comment on that now, perhaps that's a bit unfair. I think I would like a more considered response in the lessons from each of these appendices. So okay. I'll just park that and request that as a separate response, because I think it's perhaps a bit unfair to put you on the spot. I would like a considered response for that. Adam, do you have any other comments on that, please?
Not really much to add, other than I do think that there are some variances on here, and as Richard has mentioned, there will be some areas that we can rotate budgets around. There's some have worked well, some haven't worked well, and we will need to understand why that is the case, and we will be doing that work as part of the budget going forward. I mean, it is vitally important that each area has enough money to function and to do their job, but there will be some areas where they've been really good with their money and other areas that need help.
Okay, thank you for that, Adam. We've spent an hour on this now. We're only on point 1 of 2 points on this one agenda item, although I do think this is by far the most substantive part of this agenda, so I did want most of the meeting to be spent on this. I have so all of the members of the committee have commented on part 1. We will come on to part 2, which will be a lot quicker. Councillor Baxter has asked to speak. Just as a reminder that we've spent an hour on this, Councillor Baxter, if you can make your questions as brief as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I know it's an hour because it's an hour since I asked to speak. That's not your fault. It's because there's an awful lot in here to get through.
Councillor Baxter, if I can just, members of the committee speak first, and then the councillors, and then members of the public. So thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, I'm not complaining. I've got lots of questions, as you'd imagine. Jumping straight in, Appendix C, we have savings and income generation. I mean, you could spend an hour just on this page. For example, there are 12 items on this page, on page 225, where we have hit our target for savings bang on. £300,000 on restructure savings. I appreciate some clarity on which restructure that is, but we hit it on the button. So there's 12 where we hit it bang on: green waste collection, environmental health, and then there are 5 where we missed it altogether, where we didn't get a penny in savings, and that to me looks equally suspicious. That we either didn't do anything, or we had a £300,000 target and hit it completely. And then in between, there are certain things. Councillor Stokes mentioned that we are an ambitious target. I think there's a line between ambitious and fantasist, because there's at least 1 or 2 on here that we had the previous year as well. For example, use of agency staff, we predicted a massive saving. Corporate procurement savings, we planned to have 300,000 and we only got 50. I think if we were more realistic in our ambition, it would help everybody.
Just to interject here, Councillor Baxter, the point about savings has been noted, and it's been minuted that we want to do a deeper dive on these figures, because like yourself, I'm a little bit concerned that some of these been totally missed, and some of them have been overachieved, etc., etc. So we have requested a deeper dive on that. If I can move you on to your next comment, please.
So an explanation of what multifunctional devices are would be helpful. We have 400. No, are we 400 or 4 million overspent on? 44% overspent on our growth budget, and I can't quite see what that is within the whole report. I can't see any mention of Invest SK and very little of the other SKs. Invest SK is over £1 million. I would have thought it would merit at least a line or a mention as to whether or not we're over or underspent and kind of what we got for the money. With the Invest to Save fund on paragraph 4.5 of the main report, we say that we have spent £53,000 on Invest to Save reserve, including the advertising initiative. And you will remember, Chair, that a year ago we had a great big long conversation about whether or not we should go into this advertising. I think we even called it in, this Invest to Save advertising initiative. And as I understand it, we haven't done anything on that. We haven't spent, or rather we haven't spent any money on that yet. So the 53,000 is the finance service review and the online forms. So with these Invest to Save issues, what payback are we expecting from those? And finally, the last time we looked at this was about December or February time, and we said that there was an awful lot underspent up to the end of Q3. And I think you yourself said that you didn't like seeing budgets which were tilted to one end, where most of the money was spent in the last quarter. I wondered if anyone could comment on how we did in terms of spending the available budget by the end of March.
Okay, so can we just answer those, Mr. Chairman?
Just to summarise, yeah. So the 4 points, just to summarise, are on savings. We are going to return to that on a deeper dive. If you've got anything else to add, please do. If not, the multifunctional devices, by the way, I believe are photocopiers. So we can just tick that off. Very strange description. Growth, that has also been added to the work plan because it's been noted that that's the widest budgetary item at 44% variance there. If you can comment on Invest SK there. The Invest to Save, I welcome those comments. I'm grateful for those. I think if you can comment on that, but I also think that should be added to our work plan. Mark and I will discuss that because you're absolutely right. There needs to be cost-benefit analysis around some of these investor saves. I'm grateful for that as a comment, but if you want to comment on that, and the 4th point there was the spending pattern in the 4th quarter. So Richard.
Okay. Just in terms of the growth, as you say, you're going to bring it back, but if it is helpful, actually, once you strip out those non-accounting entries in the growth directorate, the variance is only 1%. So it's just labouring that point that the non-accounting entries that partly Councillor Dawson alluded to, when they're hitting those service lines and there are variants on the budget, we're going to get those massive distortions. We've already learned that in terms of an improvement, and the cabinet version of this report actually presents table 4 once those accounting entries have been removed. So that clarity comes through on the cabinet version of this report, which will go to the governance and audit as well. But I'm happy to bring that back, and you can see that distinction because it does help members drill down more into the areas that have seen difficulty in those budgets. But it does remove, if you like, the red herrings of the non-cash items. So actually the 44% becomes 1% once you've removed those accounting entries. But we'll bring that back and we can have that debate another time. Invest to Save, sorry,
and you're asked to comment upon the location of Invest SK figures.
Yeah, so Invest SK is very simple because effectively what the mechanism is. The council pays Invest SK an agreed sum, which was set out in the budget, and Invest SK deliver their business plan in accordance with that sum. So there is no variance from the council's perspective, because it's paying effectively a contractual arrangement between itself and the company. The variances will sit in Invest SK in their accounts, which clearly isn't what we're looking at today, and it's not within the remit of the committee. So there is no variance to report, because the council has paid over what it has set out to pay, simplistically. And Investor Save is a reserve, so you've already mentioned you want that on your work programme, so Investor Save will be looked at through the lens of your review. But what I would say is Investor Save access to it is through non-key decisions, and the visibility of the business cases, the payback, the outlay, the returns are all set out in those non-key decisions. Councillor Baxter references where I think they were either called in or they were scrutinised in some way. They were non-key decision reports that your committee was looking at. So that mechanism is set up so members are fully cited on how the Investor Save Reserve is used and for what purpose.
And finally, the spending pattern.
Sorry, the spending pattern. That was simply the profiling of the budgets. A large element of the actuals in terms of the annual accounting process is done in period 12. So things like depreciation and the accounting entries we've talked about at several points are done in period 12. So when you were looking at your report in February, you were looking at an annual budget, and the actual to date that was before period 12 was occurring. So when period 12 comes along, a lot of these year-end entries are done, which swallows up that difference between the annual budget and the actuals at that point.
Okay, thank you for that.
Learned from, so just to help that, we have learned from that, and we will ensure in future we don't have such a distortion in the figures, which obviously can become confusing for people.
Okay, thank you for that, and thank you for those comments and questions. If you mentioned grants there. I mean, in an earlier comment, I mentioned that we would probably we wanted to add to the work plan an investigation of the loans that the council is making to public money. I actually think that should also include grants. This is public money at the end of the day. Kind of cost-benefit analysis around the community fund, around grants to ISK. I think it would be interesting and useful to see and just ensure that public money is being utilised in a fashion.
Can I just try, Mr. Chairman, can I just mention loans, because I know you did raise it, I didn't actually directly respond to it. The mechanism for the loan arrangement between the council and the companies is set out in the Treasury strategy, which is presented and approved by council of each year. So the authority for the council to make commercial, and that's what they are, commercial arrangements between itself and the companies are all set out in the Treasury strategy. So the mechanism and the authority sits in there.
I'm grateful for that. Mark and I will look at that and see whether that should form part of the work plan. It's an interesting comment. So I would like to move on from point 1 to point 2. Now, point 2, this should be a lot quicker, thankfully. You are asking us to review and recommend to the Audit and Governance Committee the budget carry forwards in Appendix E and I of the reserve movement shown at section 4 and 7 of the report. Now, in the pre-meet, the councillors said you need to be much clearer as to what we are agreeing to here. What specifically are you asking this committee to agree to? What numbers specifically? And then we will take a vote on it.
Okay, so in the detail of this does really sit in the appendices. So, as we've started to close down the financial year, a number of service areas have requested that unspent budgets within the 1920 are moved across into 2021. So that has the effect of increasing the budgets for 2021 by the amount we're carrying over. So it's unspent budgets. Now, the reasons for those requests are predominantly because the projects have started in 1920 but not completed in 1920, and therefore without the carry forwards the council runs the risk of spending money in 2021 at a greater level than the budget. So this is normally an issue where projects have not been delivered within the timescale of the financial year, and for whatever reasons they've straddled into the following year. So that's why those requests have come forward. And as the report says, they're set out in E and I. E is general fund and I is HRA, and they're split within each one between capital and revenue.
Okay, so just to confirm very quickly, you're asking us to confirm appendices E and I to be carried forward to next year. Does anybody on the committee have any further questions as to what they are agreeing to accept and recommend?
Content with the explanations, Chairman.
Okay, I believe that everyone is content.
Chair, just a comment.
Councillor Knowles?
Yes, please, if I don't mind. One of those items that's being carried forward is the vehicle electric charging points. Now, I'm not against that, but the reason given for it not being done last year is that it was COVID-19. Well, we know that COVID-19 didn't come in until 1 week before the thing, so that is just an excuse. Why it was not done last year was because it was not done last year. It is nothing to do with COVID-19. I'm not saying they shouldn't carry this forward, but the idea that we can be fobbed off with excuses like that is just unrealistic. We accept that COVID-19 only went into 1 week of this year. That means after this expenditure wasn't completed after 51 weeks, and so they blame the power company who couldn't do it on COVID not to have completed that. It's just, you know, it's unacceptable that we should get excuses like that. I'm not saying we shouldn't accept it, but we should be honest about it, that we didn't complete the work last year. Funny.
Can we comment on that, please, Richard, Adam?
I mean, I've got to comment, but I noticed Karen wants to comment as well.
Does she?
Yeah, no, I've got a comment as well, Chairman.
I don't know where you see Karen's comment. I'm not seeing that, but okay, I'll take your word for it. Okay, Karen. Oh, sorry, it has now come through.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I know I'd only been at the authority 2 weeks before we did go into lockdown, but when I arrived, the electric company that we've been waiting for quite a period of time, as I understand, to do the installation and connect the units up, were actually on site. So the units are in. It's very disappointing that they were doing it at the end of the year, which I totally appreciate the frustration by the member today, but they are there and they're just literally waiting now to be switched on and connected. So all installation has happened, so we're just at the final stage.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Did you want to comment as well?
It was just really to kind of say the same thing. The power company at the beginning of March started to reduce their contact working practices. It wasn't directly related to the lockdown. A lot of companies leading up to the lockdown started to reduce and slow down their contact arrangements with other parties. So it's actually quite early in March where they already contacted us to say they won't come out and connect.
Fine. I'd like to move on. Adam, are you going to say the same thing, or?
Yeah, everything that I was going to say.
Okay, so I would like to move on because we are increasing time pressure. Councillor Dilks, you'd like to comment upon these carry forwards as well, please.
No, it was simply to help. I think Councillor Peter Knowles, Dr. Knowles, has said, Knowsley has said in a previous meeting that they actually had a date. Literally, I think he said it was the day before lockdown happened, or the day after lockdown happened, that the electricity company were going to hook it up, and obviously they didn't do it then. So thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. Are there any other comments from the committee about these carry forwards? Okay, we have been asked to vote on these, so I'm going to. So the vote is those in favour of these carry forwards to the next year. If I can call your names out one by one. Councillor Adams, for or against?
For.
Councillor Dawson?
For.
Councillor Dilks?
For.
Councillor Knowles? Councillor Knowles?
I think he's left. Just got a flash to say he'd left the meeting, Chairman.
Okay, moving on. Councillor Wotton?
For.
Councillor Whittington?
For.
Okay, so that is approved to move those forward to the following year. So I would like to move on. Thank you for that. We have spent a lot of time on the outturn. I think there was a lot of useful information there, and I'm grateful to the officers that put this report together and all the detail that there is therein. Thank you for that. There's lots of follow-ups which I'm looking forward to seeing in the minutes. Okay, so moving on to the financial impact report, please, if I can move to that next, which is pages 177 to 198 in your report. I also believe this is in the hands of Councillor Stokes.
Yeah, there we go. Unmuted. Yeah, I'll introduce again, and then we'll go to Richard. But this report is the latest monthly figures to what was presented to the OSC on the 26th of May. And included in this time is obviously the two cash flows you got last time, but you've also got the risk register that was asked by the committee last time, Appendix C, and also we've got a reserves forecast at Appendix D. Obviously, all I'm asking is to review the current position and comment on the actions being taken as detailed in the report, and then to agree to continue to monitor the financial position in preparation for the development of the amended budget framework, which obviously will be heard by Council on the 17th of September. But I'm here to take questions as before, so I'll hand over to Richard. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Richard, if you'd like to briefly run through this report.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As has been said, it builds on the report on the 26th of May, and hopefully we've tried to introduce some more elements as well as we kind of get our thinking clear on how this is impacting across the authority, which we're hopefully as well trying to refine the information to make it more timely but more relevant. Whilst this largely focuses on this year, it is important to stress that this will have implications for 2021 and beyond, and not only in terms of the recovery of these income areas, but also in terms of what we call the collection fund, which is where all the business rate income goes in and where all the council tax income goes in. Clearly, there's going to be an impact on our collection, if not now, at some point during the year. And we've not, at this point, spent too much time with the committee to talk that through and describe it, but also to then model what that could look like going forward. But it's definitely just something to flag for now that we will need to revisit with yourselves going forward. And I don't know how many more meetings we'll have before the workshop in August, but clearly what's happening now will have a huge bearing on the amended budget proposals that your committee will be looking at on the 26th of August. So we'll keep this as accurate and tight as we can as we lead up to that time. And we've deliberately given a mid-month position to give you the most accurate position. So this is as at the 12th of June. Ordinarily would go to a month end, but we have sliced it down the middle of the month to again give you the most relevant information. And what that tells us is we're £900,000 down on losses against budget, if losses is the word. So our projection for forecast impact for the 6 months is 2 million. So for the year we're thinking about 3.6 million will be around about the income shortfall, and that is largely based on the assumptions around recovery. Now clearly as that changes, as we get more information about when venues can open, what's the social distancing arrangements, etc., they will need to change as well. So this is in some ways quite vague to a point because of those assumptions. It's all driven not only on the actuals, but also on the assumptions, and we continue to work across Lincolnshire with other partners to make sure we are consistent, or at least understand where we are different on what assumptions we are building in. So that forecasting continues. Councillor Stokes mentioned cash flow, and we talked about it quite a lot at the last meeting. I've not spent too much time on the cash flow this time because it's largely now to a steady state. We're not seeing so much volatility as we did in those early weeks, where particularly reliefs and monies were changing quite quickly. And you can see on the business rates, our collectible debit is now almost just slightly less than half. We've gone from a 43 million collectible debit down to 25 million collectible debit, largely and simply because of all the grants and all the reliefs that the government have introduced on the back of the response to the pandemic, and therefore a lot of businesses have now been taken out of rating. Now you could argue that those are left are equally difficult to collect, so again we're going to have to see how we get on with the rest of the year collecting. But so far, collection rates are holding up, and businesses in the main have been very responsive to coming forward and helping us work through scenarios. I did mention the pool, and it's relevant for this year. Whilst we may get a gain out of 1920, it is less likely we'll be getting a gain in 2021. And the risk we carry as all councils in the pool is that if people fall into losses, then the pool contributes to those losses. So we're kind of all in it together from that respect. And we've worked with some external consultants to model how far down business rates would have to get before the pool itself got into difficulties. And you can see in paragraph 112, the modelling is saying at the moment we could all have a 15% reduction across Lincolnshire in terms of income on business rates before the pool gets into difficulty. So 15% is quite a large variance. So we're optimistic. Whilst the gain from the pool may be minimal or zero, hopefully we won't be getting into a loss position. But we have engaged quarterly monitoring on the pool to give members information on how the pool is performing. What I thought was also interesting is the analysis that's been done across the Lincolnshire area, but also for South Kesteven, of our category of our businesses. So maybe a surprise to members, actually a surprise to me, there's over 360 different classifications the Valuation Office has for business types. I couldn't even think of what 360 are. Nevertheless, that categorisation has then been split into high, medium, low risk. That's obviously subjective, but it's profiling things around manufacturing companies, retail, hospitality, the different sectors and how they may be exposed to the volatility that we're seeing in the economy at the moment. And again, there is some level of reassurance that our spread of risk across is relatively towards the lower end. So those businesses deemed to be relatively protected from this recession that's coming, which they are now calling a more sectorial recession rather than a blanket one. Hopefully this district will be slightly less exposed to that, but obviously we'll need to wait and see. So that hopefully gives members some level of assurance. Council tax and business rates I've mentioned. We continue to monitor direct debits. We continue to mention collection rates, and thus far they're still holding up. But you could argue that with the furloughing now starting to be wound down, some of the difficulties may be further down the line, and therefore these early months and weeks may not be wholly representative. But at the moment, again, in line with neighbours, we're kind of where we need to be. I won't go on to the costs in too much detail because they're largely the same as the ones we talked about on the 26th of May. I would say there's no further allocations of funding from government. We still stand at 1.4 million, although there is talk of a third tranche coming down the line, hopefully in July. So we look forward to seeing further funding coming our way, and of course the committee will be updated if that proves to be the case. But at the moment, 1.4 million, we're still some way shy of where we need to be. We're still about 3.5 adrift at this moment in time. I'll probably leave it there, Mr. Chairman, because I think in terms of the programme, the risk register, they're items we have covered at previous meetings, but clearly we're updating those as we go forward as well.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you for that, Richard. Thank you, Adam. I welcome the work on this. This is obviously a moving target. I'm going to cycle through members who may have some questions. I'm going to do that relatively quickly, if that's okay. If you can keep your comments brief as we're running a little bit behind. I'm going to start this time with Councillor Wotton. Do you have any comments or questions on this report?
Thank you, Chairman. I just thought it was an excellent report. I mean, the whole shaboodle, all 280 pages, it was really an effort to try and read it. I've read majority what I thought was important. I thought Richard, Adam, etc. have covered everything, and I have no further questions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Wootton. Moving on, Councillor Adams.
No further questions or comments, Chairman. Thank you.
Dawson.
The same. No further questions or comments.
Dilks. Councillor Dilks.
No, but thank you for the report.
Councillor Knowles.
Yes, and my apologies. I was thrown out of the meeting for 5 minutes, so I'm back again now. So no further questions.
Okay, Councillor Whittington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one comment and then one question, if I may. The general comment is that I've been sort of, at the moment, obviously we're forecasting potential loss of income of about 3.6 million at the year end, and we received funding of about 1.4 million, which is about a third of our expected shortfall. Actually, I've been talking to. I was in a meeting last week, talking to another district leader of a council in Lincolnshire, and their particular council have been funded to about a third of their shortfall. And his view was that generally seems to be councils across the country have received roughly about a third from the government in the two tranches of funding towards covering their costs of COVID, whereas for county councils, they on average have received funding that covers about 84% of their COVID-related extra expenditure. So I think that sort of just demonstrates the disparity in the two funding of the two tranches so far. So some comments on that from Richard would be useful. And obviously, if he does know, and hopefully the third tranche, if it does come, will be more favourably skewed towards the district councils. And then the point I was going to raise, Mr. Chairman, which I think is a point that you wanted to raise as well, is on the risk register and the fact that all the risks are classed as high. Now, and the question is, well, my question is that because every risk, and I appreciate at the moment every risk is a high risk, or are there other risks that are out there, financial risks, that have been classed as medium or low and aren't contained on the report? So that's it from me, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Richard, can you comment on those?
Yeah, and thank you for that. Again, if members are able to access, and I'm happy to send it out as a separate link, the latest COVID report that starts to frame some of the work around the budget proposals, which this committee will be looking at in more detail. Clearly, whilst this is predominantly looking at the income, there are now costs emerging that when we forecast those going forward, they become a significant figure in their own right. I think at the moment our modelling is about 1.8 million, particularly with a third-party contractor requirement. So not only have we got the income losses, we've also got some costs now being built into the model. So you're absolutely right. I think we'll probably be nudging to less than a third thus far from the tranches. And of course, the districts are predominantly exposed because it's the income through various austerity measures that have meant that our income, either commercial or through our fees and charges, is becoming more and more important as we build our budgets going forward. So, and the counties and the upper tiers aren't exposed in that same way. Clearly, they're going to have pressures around their social care and those other statutory responsibilities they have at that level. But the income is where some of this impact is really starting to be felt by districts, and we do welcome further funding from government, and hopefully the allocation methodology is more favourable, which we did see evidence of in tranche 2 compared to tranche 1, and hopefully they will develop that in the future allocation, but thus far it's not at the levels that we need it to be. We continue to send information to the MHCLG through the monthly returns that they are still asking for, which again is hopeful. If they're asking the question, then hopefully they're going to respond with an answer. So we have over the last couple of weeks submitted our latest return, which sets out the exposure we've got. So we'll wait and see. I think in terms of the risk register, clearly, yes, everything is high. That will get refined as we move forward. We're not at critical stage because we've managed the cash flow with about 70 million on short-term deposits that I think we talked about in the last meeting that we can call back on, so we can minimise disruption in our cash flow projections. And I don't think we've got enough intel on understanding what the budgetary impact is going to be in its entirety, as I said, based on the recovery and the assumptions we're making around recovery. But I think some of these highs can start to be perhaps reviewed downwards as we start to get more confidence that we've now got a handle on the exposure, and as we work towards these amendments, because these amendments are clearly going to be seeking to address these budget shortfalls, and as we've got confidence in our deliverables around those, we can start to bring back this register down to a less high level.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I just ask one further question, if possible?
Please, yeah.
Thanks, Chairman. So thanks for that, Richard. That really does help to clarify the situation, because from what you've said, it looks like potentially we're looking at an under recovery of income of about 2.2 million and a cost pressure of about 1.8. So potentially there could be a £4 million gap, unless pending any additional funding we may give from tranche 3. So that's going to be quite. I appreciate that's going to be quite a challenge, isn't it? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I think that point is noted. I would like to move on. Thank you for that, Councillor Whittington. Just a couple of quick comments from me. First of all, I welcome the report. It's very well. It's very good. It's very good. The cash flow statement is excellent. It's being updated well, and I think it's at the exactly right level of detail. Thank you for that. It's very reassuring. Going back to the financial risk register, I'm grateful that the first draft of this has been produced. To me, this doesn't feel like a completed piece of work. I think that there's more to add to this. Basically, all operational risks have a financial impact on the council. And I'd like to see some operational rather than just purely accounting financial risks in there. I mean, in my experience, it tends to be the risks that emerge from being a low risk that jump up and punch you in the face that tend to be the ones that hurt most. And I think that there's more work and more lateral thinking that needs to go into this financial risk register, really around what we today might consider medium-term risks. But I don't really need you to comment on that. I just would like to see a few more operational risks with their associated financial implications on this risk register to build it out. Because, I mean, if you need to talk offline about the kind of things that you might think about that, I'm sure every member of the committee would be available to talk about that. But I think more needs to be done on this risk register. Now, if there are no more questions and comments, I think I'd like to move on. Okay, great. So I would like to move on. Everyone has done that. So I'd like to move on. The next point is the performance report, which is pages 247 to 269 of this report. And that is in the hands of Claire Milner and Ben Russell.
No, it's in my hands, Mr. Chairman. I'll present the report today.
Sorry.
Okay. So thank you for the opportunity to take you through the report. What we've done today is cover two areas within the report. Firstly, the COVID-19 response and the performance of the council in that area, and then we've also provided the outturn performance figures against the measures that were agreed with this committee last year through the performance workshops that we've obviously been bringing back for some time now. So starting with the COVID-19 response, we've modelled our response based on the priorities that were set out by the council, and we've seen a significant period of change as a result of the efforts to tackle the pandemic and ensure the authority responds proactively. And that includes the redeployment of 90 staff members to ensure that services keep running in the way that you'd expect, but also the additional activities that were required to support our communities and the most vulnerable were effectively managed and delivered. So as you can see from the report, we deployed staff into street care to keep that essential work going. There was a befriending service that was set up that saw over 20 officers and a number of elected members talking to vulnerable residents every week to manage the impact of social isolation that could have been caused by the pandemic. And we deployed the change and OD team, those that normally manage some of those transformation initiatives, and the performance work into the response team to ensure that we coordinated those activities effectively. So as part of the response, we saw an increase in demand for certain services. We saw an increase in demand particularly for revenues and benefits services, more people claiming help with council tax or grants that Richard's already highlighted. And as part of that, we moved call handling into the customer contact centre. So with that additional demand and with wider changes to customer services, we actually were able to see an improvement in call handling numbers. So we went up from 90% to just over 93% calls being answered over that pandemic period. We also put a lot of effort into ensuring that our staff were well informed of the work that was ongoing. As you know, we moved from a position where we typically had about 30 people working at home to a position where 400 people routinely work from home. So we changed the way that we engage with staff, holding daily meetings with staff members, and we also engaged in a staff survey to ensure that those efforts were effective, with 84% of those that could respond to the survey responding, and the overall response from that was extremely positive, with people finding the communications from the leader and chief executive extremely helpful, the wellbeing activities that were designed to minimise stress and look at how people manage the work-life balance in challenging times were well received. To enable that shift in work style to happen, we accelerated the deployment of agile technologies, the laptop rollout that we've spoken about before. So an additional 84 laptops were rolled out in about a week, which enabled that increase in working to take place. What we've also seen is extensive proactive communications with our residents and stakeholders, and that's seen a significant uplift in the number of people engaging with us through social media channels, with an 89% increase on Facebook, and the number of people viewed our tweets has gone up 4 times. So we've mentioned the befriending service, but just to highlight some further points within that, within the first 2 weeks, over 1,300 people were contacted who we identified from our records as potentially being vulnerable and in need of some additional support. And 18,000 residents were contacted overall to ensure that they're aware of the support that was being provided by the council. And nearly 300 people signed up to receive weekly calls from us and also have things like prescriptions and access to food and advice provided. In terms of business support, echoing the points Richard's made about funding acquisition, there's an awful lot of work around grant funding coming through. So we ranked 24th in the country for the distribution of business grants, and 1,834 grants were paid out, and to date over £27 million has been paid to local businesses, which is a terrific achievement. So as you work through those, the first part of the report, I think you can see an awful lot of positive work has been completed over a relatively short period of time, and hopefully that provides you with a good summary of the first part. Moving on to the general performance reporting, as usual we've attached appendices 2 to 8 that provide the more detailed view of performance with the most up-to-date narrative for those. The report highlights a couple of key points. Firstly, Appendix 5 shows that in the last quarter, planning processing times fell slightly below target, but over the year, performance was on target and where we'd expect it to be. Equally, there's some positive news around new homes, with 729 new homes being completed against target of 650, and 22% of those were classed as affordable housing. We've also seen a reduction in complaints, and the analysis on complaints shows that they are aligned to the highest volume transaction areas, but equally the highest number of compliments also come in for those areas. And there's been some positive steps around recycling figures, and that's increased to from 37% in 2018-19 to 40.8% in 2019-20, and there's further work to improve that further, as previously discussed. Beyond that, work has continued to develop operational performance dashboards. So that's both been part of ensuring operational practices continue to perform well during the COVID period, but also looking further ahead from that to make sure that our managers have access to the data they need to make day-to-day decisions, and then are able to use those tools to forecast performance and understand the impact of any changes that they're seeking to make. So again, the report sets out a number of examples where that's been delivered, and work will continue over the next quarter to further that. But I think given the time pressures on the committee and the detail in the report, I'll leave it at that point, but I'm happy, Chairman, to take any questions that you or the committee may have. Thank you.
I'd like to move to questions. As I say, I promised to move it up, mix it up a bit. I'll start with one quick question. I may summarise at the end. The objective of these dashboards was increased openness about the activities of the council, and in that we were going to put them on our website in a real-time fashion and put them out in the public domain. Where are we on getting these dashboards, or any dashboards, live in the public domain on our website, available for the general public to look at?
So the position as it stands now is that live dashboards aren't displayed on the website, but the dashboards on a quarterly basis are published publicly through this committee. We've been focusing on ensuring data quality, but also ensuring that the benchmarking activities are completed and are most relevant to give the true picture of our performance. We'll do further work through the corporate plan to refine that.
Just to come back on that point, the observation of this committee as we develop these is that we need to do more than just publish them through committee minutes, and that the aspiration, there's a lot of work to do to get to that aspiration, is that these need to be available somewhere in the public domain on the website. But okay, it sounds as if there's more work to be done on that. Okay, I want to cycle through people. Phil Dilks, Councillor Dilks.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. My picture's not on, but there we are. Thank you, and thanks for the report, Mr. Sturdyfield. I just wanted to ask a question on the, particularly on the bin men, but related to bonus payments that we've been making. I understand that bin men are receiving, is it £50 a week bonus? Can you clarify how many people are we paying that to? Is it just the bin men? And how long do we think, as we're easing out of lockdown, how long will that continue? What's the agreement on it? Thank you.
Yeah, I can respond to that. So the payments are just to the waste services team. And this was in recognition of the additional challenges that they were facing as a result of the pandemic, and the real need to keep that critical service running. And they are amongst the lowest paid in the organisation, and when you look across Lincolnshire, they are on lower salaries than many of our neighbouring local authorities. So it's recognition for the exceptional contribution that they've made. That's something that we're reviewing on a regular basis. We are looking at pay and reward through the employment committee, so we'll be picking up further work on pay as we progress, but we're looking at how we better align our salaries to national levels, and that in turn could see the removal of those payments. But we'll continue to review that as a CMT on a regular basis as well.
Can I just say thank you? Thanks for the reply, Mr. Sturdyfield. I mean, clearly it seems to be money well spent, because the service has been excellent and has continued as we wished it to. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That point's noted. Moving on. Councillor Dawson.
Well, really, just to reiterate what Councillor Dilks has said, the service from dustbins, green bins, it's been truly phenomenal, and it's one thing that all the public, there's the one thing they've all noticed. They've all noted how well our service has gone on. So, in that respect, absolutely fantastic. I have no other comments. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Those points are noted. Moving on, Councillor Adams.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just to add my voice to the congratulations, particularly to the waste collection people, done an absolutely phenomenal job and kept very cheerful and happy while they've been doing it as well. And they really ought to be commended. And I think probably from this committee, we ought to send some thanks from this committee for all the work that they've done, Chairman. Thank you.
Point is noted. And we shall do that. Councillor Wharton.
Excuse me. Thank you, Chairman. Yes, once again, an excellent report from Young Lee. Gives us lots of information. I've been really proud to be part of SKDC, linking up with the hub. The reports that we got back from the public where we've been out to volunteer, they couldn't praise the service that they've been getting highly enough. I think it's really good. We've been proactive, been switched on the ball, helping the public wherever we can. And I'd like to just comment on the dashboards. I like the dashboards a lot, but I agree with my colleagues about the waste collection. We should be so proud in this area. Services continued, so the public weren't left with rubbish building up like they have in some areas. I think that's been excellent. We've been building more houses for a change. That's excellent. Just one comment on the complaints by month, because you can see it on the dashboard. But I'd like to ask a question, please. We had 472 complaints, and I'd like to ask, what are we doing about those complaints? Are the service managers being tasked with getting them down? They must know where the problems are occurring, and are we addressing that problem? And that's my questions. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Just to help you on that, the table to the left of those complaints does give a breakdown of those complaints, complaints by service area. I suppose your comment that the top perhaps three, we perhaps need a written response as to why we're getting 306 complaints on street, 104 on repairs, etc. Do you want to comment on that, or would you prefer to do to secure a written response, Lee?
I'm happy to comment and do a written response if that helps. We've mentioned previously that we're introducing a new complaints solution that's going to give us more data around what's happening and why, and ensure that our performance in terms of responding is where we'd expect it to be. We're looking at getting more qualitative data through as well to understand the nature of some of those complaints. So when you recognise that somebody like the street care service collects 80,000 bins a week, complaint numbers are statistically low, but we need to understand whether that is coming from certain areas on certain roads or certain types of interaction. So that work is due to follow later this year, but I can provide more breakdown.
Okay, thank you for that. Moving on, as I say, if you can provide a written response. Chief Executive Karen Bradford, do you want to comment on the last couple of speakers? Karen? Karen? Okay, whilst Karen's sorting that out, I think I'm going to move on. Councillor Knowles.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I associate my with myself with the comments that other people have been made about the excellence of the service that's been provided, particularly the bin service? I think it's been excellent, and congratulations to all those concerned. If you look at the house building performance, would you kindly note that more than 25% of the houses in 1920 were built in Bourne, and that the plans for the local plan suggest that 8% more of the houses going forward over the next 5 years should be built in Bourne, and that adds up to about 60 a year. And we've already got an application in for a much larger portion of housing on land which is registered under the local plan as not being building land. And I would hope that that information would go forward to the planning committee so that they could take that into account when they consider that application, which we understand is coming up on August the 5th. Thank you, Jim.
That observation is noted, Councillor Knowles, and thank you for those comments. Obviously, the strength of these reports is that we are now learning these breakdowns that in previous years we may never have got to learn. So I thank you for making that very valid observation as to the value of these reports. Moving on, Councillor Whittington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just again, thank Lee for the excellent report. It's looking at a lot of information. Really delighted the way we've been able to respond to the current situation we've got, which then leads on to the question I was going to ask. We're doing, the agile workforce is going forward. We've got more staff working from home, more laptops, more of the public are accessing our social media accounts. We've now got the telephone call handling service that's up and running. All of this is channel shift. It may be slightly forced channel shift as a result of the present crisis, but it is forcing through a big change in the way not only our staff work, but in the way members of the public access our services. Now, going forward from this post-COVID, does this pose real questions about how we as a council function? Do we, if staff can work from home and members of the public can access services via the telephone call centre, do we still need all the big buildings that we've got? I mean, I saw a report that KPMG wrote for Hackney Council, and they identified that at Hackney, every time a member of the public walked into an office owned by Hackney Council, cost Hackney Council 14 quid. Every time that they phoned up the council, it was 4 quid. But every time they accessed services online, it was 40p. Is there any way going forward that potentially we could provide, we're already proving the channel shift is working, could we actually going forward actually just totally look at the way we actually do things, because there's tremendous savings to be made there, but bearing in mind that if the old rule that normally this sort of stuff is okay for the 80% roughly of people who've got a PC and broadband, but what will we do for the 20% of people who can't? So that would just be something around that. Secondly, on the new homes, great that we've done 729 last year above the target of 650. Is COVID likely to have an impact this year on the number of houses we can build towards our 650 target? Because obviously anything that we don't achieve has to be carried forward. And finally, a few different parts of the country have been talking about, with access to waste, to domestic waste stations, recycling places not being available, that there's been an increase in fly tipping. Have we noticed any extra increase in fly tipping? So those three areas. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
On those two questions, by the way, your question about channel shift, I think, is a very valid one, and it's a bigger question than I'd expect to have like a 10-second answer from an officer on this. I think that there are a lot of lessons to learn from the last 3 months about channel shift. And can I recommend that you recommend that goes on the work programme for a proper considered report rather than just a quick answer? So with that aside, we'll minute that as another item for the work programme about the delivery of corporate services based upon the experiences of channel shift that we've seen in the last 3 to 4 months. On the housing target, would you be able to answer that, Lee, or would you request a written response to be provided?
We will have updated figures over the next 2 weeks as we look at the Q1 performance for that measure. So what I'd be intending to do, if that suits you, is to bring back the updated position for the next committee, and we can look at how that compares to the same period in the previous year.
Yeah, that sounds good.
I'm absolutely fine with that. I would like to move on because my stomach's telling me it's lunchtime. I've got a few quick questions that other members want to ask. If you can make your comments quick and short, please. Councillor Dilks first.
Very short comment on Councillor Mark's comments, which I absolutely agree with on the cost of different ways of accessing. Perhaps the answer, Mark, would be that we have someone standing outside the council offices handing out £10 notes, providing people promise not to come in.
We will minute Councillor Dilks's suggestion and make sure that everyone could read that.
Provide the cash, Chairman.
Moving on, Councillor Baxter. Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Chairman. I completely agree with the stuff about putting this on the website. It's virtually impossible for a member of the public to compare South Kesteven over time, let alone compare South Kesteven with South Holland or South Winchester or anywhere else. But my two questions are, Councillor Wotton said we're building more houses. I don't think it's actually us that are building the houses, it's the developers. Do we have any information on how many council houses we have built as a council and how that compares to the target that we have for ourselves? I know that we've just opened 16 modular homes, but how many council houses did we build last year? And my other question is about waste. The waste performance information on page 269. Yet again, can I please ask that we have some comparison over time? It's impossible to tell from looking at this sheet of paper whether or not we're getting better or worse at waste management. We can't see against previous years whether 40% is good or bad. I can tell you it's bad, and the contamination rate of about 29% compares to about 30 in previous years, but that's only because I've taken an interest in the figures over time. That's not evident from this sheet of paper in front of us.
Thank you for that, Councillor Baxter. Your points on the waste over time are noted, and it's something that we've been looking to improve these reports as they come forward. If we can note that report, note that observation as an enhancement that's needed for that dashboard. On council houses, do you have any figures of that, or is that something that you would like to have a written response provided?
I'll take that away if I may. I don't have a breakdown of those numbers with me.
I actually think that possibly also represents an enhancement to the dashboard, in that a sub-line could be produced for council housing. I'm not sure whether we have targets to associate with that, but I think it's an interesting element. It's an interesting way of breaking down that number. I'm grateful for your comments, Councillor Baxter. I will return again to the Chief Executive, Karen, if she's sorted out her IT gremlins. Karen Bradford.
Hello, Councillor Gill.
Okay, please.
Can you hear me? Yeah, no, I was just coming back on a few things. Sorry, I've got some right gremlins today. It's going to be good for Companies Committee later, isn't it? In reference to the waste, of course, we extended the operatives bonus system up to the end of September recently. And they have been doing a fantastic service. I've been down there a number of times through COVID-19. What I'd like to do, and it was really pleasing to hear you propose that the committee actually write to the team and thank them for their efforts throughout this time. As I live in Newark and Sherwood, I've certainly not had the level of service that you've certainly had in South Kesteven. So very proud of that. Fly tipping is certainly on the increase over the last 4 weeks. And we can certainly share some information with that. It was very low to start with when we was all in lockdown, and it continued to be low. But as soon as lockdown or the easing started, we've certainly seen a spike.
Councillor Gill, you're muted.
Thank you. We will move on. I think that Karen has disappeared from the meeting. So okay, we'll return to Karen if she re-emerges but I would like to move on to the final point of the agenda, which is the Future High Streets Fund. This is in the hands of the Future High Streets Fund is page 13 to page 175, and this is in the hands of Liz Bates, or is it Barry Dobson? Are you going to give an introduction?
Yeah, I'm here, Chairman. Thank you very much. And Liz is as well, I believe. She will take over and go through it all with you. Perhaps I'll just give a brief introduction, if you like. The reason for the development of Grantham as we migrate into a new way of conducting business is its position for trade, highlighted by the unique position of the town. Its infrastructure. Grantham is best situated for rail and road transport, and Lincolnshire County Council has named Grantham as one of the 2 hubs in the county to profit substantially as we move into a different way of working, the other being Lincoln itself. We need then to revitalise not only the town centre, linking this from the railway station through to Westgate, the cultural quarter and all the interesting sites. At the moment, that invitation from the railway station onward is dire, and the aim is to turn this area into a welcome for people coming to work in Grantham. And therein lies the reason for redeveloping the surrounding of the station down to Wharf Road. This will allow a mixed tenure of much needed commercial space in order to incentivise movement of organisations from London to Grantham, we hope, because its infrastructure is absolutely unique. So I'm going to hand it over to Liz. We're putting in for a grant which we have to finish by the end of this month and pass it over to our consultants to prepare for submission by the end of July. But it is a unique offer. We've been given various sort of good amber lights, so hopefully they'll all go green. But if I can hand this over to Liz Bates, she will take you through all the technical details.
Sure, Liz. If I can ask, I mean, it's a hugely impressive piece of work, and I know that a lot of work, excellent work, has gone into this. If I can ask you to keep your introductory comments brief, so that we have enough time for questions, please. And if you can focus on the timetable of the milestones of what happens next, Liz.
Okay, I will do. So at the moment, we are in an extension period, so they extended this by a month due to the COVID-19 outbreak. So the deadline for the final bid is now the 31st of July. Following that, there'll be an assessment process undertaken by MHCLG, and decisions will be made in the autumn. We don't have a firmer date than that, but we understand that it's going to coincide with the autumn budget statement from government. So this is a great opportunity for Grantham. It's an opportunity to access funding that will make a kind of once in a generation, really, investment in our town centre. And it's really, as Councillor Dobson said, an opportunity to invest in the infrastructure of the town centre so that we create the right environment to increase footfall, to encourage that business diversification so that we're not entirely reliant upon retail, and to really create that sense of community so that both residents of Grantham, but of course across the district, feel that it's worth visiting for various services and activities. So it's really a starting point, and that's why MHCLG gave the council a revenue grant, not just to prepare the bid, but also to do the master planning exercise that you've seen within the papers there, which I think gives us an opportunity to look at what the longer term vision is for the town centre. So not only what can be achieved with this particular funding, but what we might work towards in the future as well.
Okay, thank you. I would like to go to questions, and thanks for keeping that brief. I know that there's a huge amount of work that's gone into this, and it really is top quality work. So I thank you on behalf of the committee. I'm going to go to questions. Councillor Adams.
No, thank you. Excuse me. No, thank you, Chairman.
No questions. Councillor Dawson.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. My great concern with this of Grantham is the fact that you've got downtown that was allowed to be built on the north side, which partially killed Grantham, and we're talking of a shopping village on the south side, and it seems sort of rather peculiar to me that we're trying to get people into Grantham and we're going to send them to a shopping centre on the opposite side, and when I look at the plans, I think some of them are very, very good. This joining up the station and bringing it down there, and 46 years ago I worked in Grantham. I worked in Watergate, and what we don't want is to end up like Watergate, where I think it was 1960s, we knocked half the street down and it's still a car park. There are concerns because you've got to get the people in to the centre of the town, and how you do that, well, I don't know. That's all I'll say.
Okay, I think that's a statement rather than a question, because I think that part of that is addressed in there. But I acknowledge your comments and thank you for them, Councillor Dawson. Moving on, Councillor Dilks.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Am I right in thinking this is the first time this project has come before an ONS committee? I appreciate it went to Cabinet a couple of weeks ago, but prior to that, has it been anywhere else?
Don't know, Liz, do you answer that one?
Yes, we've had a project board that has been leading on the development of the bid, and that involves Cabinet councillors, including Councillor Cook and Councillor Dobson. It did go to a Cabinet before the draft bid was submitted, but given it was a draft bid and we were expecting comments back from MHCLG, it did make it difficult to bring it through to a scrutiny or other committee before we had those firm comments back in terms of what they would like us to bring forward in the final business case. So that's why it's coming to you at this stage.
Thank you, that's what I thought. I have great concern that this has been going on. You know, the project board, we're told in this report, was set up or started meeting last November. It's met regularly. We then got, if we go through, I don't want to go through all the steps, but you can see it has, as you say, Chairman, a huge piece of work. I accept all that. We've had consultation meetings with key stakeholders, including Buckminster Estates, Grantham Estates, Linpet Properties, and all those. I don't know who's on the project board. Yes, thank you. You tell me it's the leader, the deputy leader, but there's also representatives from the County Council, Historic England. I'd like a list of that board. That'd be helpful. And you know, we've gone out to consultation, but nothing, as far as I can see, has come before. If not any other committee of the council, not an overview and scrutiny committee. When did, for example, when was the leader of the opposition informed? When did you know about this, Chairman?
So I have a similar question, actually. We are a scrutiny committee for economic development, and we are entering this process, what feels to be towards the end of the process rather than at the start of the process. I suppose that's the direct comment. Can you comment on that, Liz? Or
only that what I would add is that we did invite all councillors to take part in the consultation and in the consultation events. I appreciate that this committee is specifically looking at economic development, but we did try and involve people in that consultation process so that it was a very open process. But as you've seen from the paperwork and from the work that we've done on the long list of projects and the criteria that we had to use in coming up with the projects we were actually going to take forward, there was a
a very fixed format to that, so we haven't had a lot of opportunity to be flexible or to invite further comment on the actual project.
I do think, Liz, I can just add to that. When I took over this portfolio, which was the end of January, that we have been, you know, we got as far as, I think, talking through it in February, and towards the end of March. Of course, we had lockdown and there were lots of things going on, but this has been a considerable amount of work done on it. And it was I think it was it not very sudden that we found ourselves being able to go for this £10 million of grant? It seems to me to have come in at a very short notice, and we had to react on it.
I think rather than go through the detail of this, I think we'll just make that statement that I think it was a missed opportunity to not involve us in an earlier stage.
I think it was done intentionally.
I would also say that that's also true of the charter trustees of the town. I'm also a charter trustee of the town of Grantham, and I think the body of the charter trustees would probably have appreciated being a stakeholder at an earlier stage.
Yeah.
I think we just need to park that point, but I think it is a valid point. Thank you for that, Councillors. Do you have any other separate points, Councillor?
I have another question, but before I come back to the other guy, what I'm saying is, here we are again. We're a couple of weeks before the full council meeting. That, you know, we're going to be asked to approve this massive report. And, you know, a couple of days before our meeting, we've already had the debate on this, you know, 160-page report on this. I've got to say, it's, you know, I don't know what happened to collaboration in this council, but it seems to have gone completely to pot, if it was ever there. Moving on, if I may, as I will, I note on paragraph 1.2, it talks about the business case setting out the council's proposals to establish a town team. You've mentioned the charter trustees, but a town team, you know, and it then gives, you know, what that they're basically going to be to rejuvenate the team and the town and all those sorts of things. Who's going to appoint this body? You know, where's the democratic accountability to it? It sounds like to me that we're attempting to set up a town council, and that we're going to pick all the members of it.
The town team is a mechanism to demonstrate to MHCLG that the council is working in partnership with other stakeholders in the town to deliver this regeneration. So it's intended that the council initially work with local stakeholders to set that body up, to take a leadership role in that, but certainly not to dictate its remit or its membership. That will be a collective.
Just to cut in there, because I don't think the answer to Phil's question or to Councillor Dilts' question is actually in this report. I think what Councillor Dilts is saying is that when the governance arrangements of that town team are created, we would like to see those governance arrangements. I think that's excuse me. That's basically the question there. I don't think they've been defined yet, Councillor Dilts, but I think it's a very valid point that we would not, and I'm sure that nobody in Invest SK and certainly nobody in the cabinet would want to face the allegation that they're establishing a town council that looks like a quango. So I think that's a very valid concern, and I'm very grateful for that point, and I'm sure we'll expect the government arrangements to come back to this committee at some stage.
I would agree, Chairman, to that as well. I think there's obviously been something that has not been particularly open here, and I think that was mainly due to the fact that it was run through Invest SK.
That's fine. I mean, the timing of the governance arrangements may be ahead of us anyway, but I think it's a very, very valid to raise this now. Thank you for that, Councillor Dills. Sure. Moving on, Councillor Knowles.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just a thought about it. It's a detailed report, read through a lot of it, but it doesn't seem to stress the importance of transport. It has a railway station, but only 2.5%, I think, of people in the survey had come in by train, and very few more by bus. Now, there are 4 big towns, or 4 towns in SKDC, and at least 2 of them are not connected to Grantham by bus. So going forward, I think if we're going to try and develop Grantham in any way, shape or form, that should include transport, presumably through Bourne down to Deeping, so that we can get there. I've lived in this town for the best part of 30 years, and we very rarely come because I have a problem finding it, and the shopping isn't good for my wife. And the other thing is I can't catch a train because we've no trains, and I can't catch a bus because we've no buses. And we might have to supplement bus service round the area to get more people involved in the footfall in Grantham. Thank you.
I think that's a very valid point, and it's one that I may have made, that the interconnectivity of our towns is poor, but I think that observation is recorded. Thank you for that, Councillor Knowles. Moving on, Councillor Wotton.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry. Yes, thank you, Chairman. I think it's a very big report. It's an excellent report, but I'd like to say we've been here before. This, to me, seems like a more modern, a rehash of something that happened off the top of my head, perhaps 10 years ago. I understand it. We need it. We're an area of growth. We've got to go for it. Future High Street Fund, brilliant. I echo my colleague, Councillor Dawson's thoughts. I think this town has killed its own retail by, we've got another centre coming at the top end near the A1, we've got downtown, we've got big supermarkets. People today want the one-stop shop, so that in itself, along with rates, business rates and rents, have killed the high streets. Now this is happening in lots of market towns. This was run through, I assume Liz works for SK Invest. I was fortunate that I did go to one of the workshops. I can tell my colleague Phil Dilks that the leader of the opposition was at that meeting with myself. There was a big selection of people from various groups, off the top of my head, like Rotary, Lions, business people, etc., there. But I think from Liz's report there was only 44 people. She might correct me, I might be wrong. Town centre teams are usually around a town centre manager. Now we had one of those last time, but the trouble is we have these wonderful ideas like get rid of the post office, get rid of the bus station. But the trouble is, nothing ever happens. Nothing happens. Are you going to stop me, Chairman?
As I say, I share and echo your frustrations of process, but I'd just like to draw you back to the report because, I mean, the process of we've been here before with several other reports, I think is entirely valid. Can I bring you back to this report just because I'd like to move this through, Councillor Wotton?
Yes, certainly, Chairman. I could highlight lots of problems within the town. I'm really into retail. I used to work in retail. I love things like this. We've left this document to the last minute. I appreciate all the work that's gone into this. A lot of work, a lot of detail. I mean, I read between the lines. I think we're going to try and make the high street traffic free, etc. And then there's all sorts of other problems, but I agree we've got to go for it, and I hope we're successful, and I hope for once that something actually gets done. That's it. Thank you, Chairman.
Do our best, Linda.
Yeah, likewise. And thank you for all of those comments. They're valid. As I say, we've been to the altar several times before as a town with these sorts of projects. Let's hope this one's more successful. Just a small correction there, Councillor Warden. I don't think this has been left to the last minute. I just think that we've been consulted towards the last minute. So, whilst I think there's been a process, it would have been better for us to have been involved earlier. I think that's the point that you were making there, that you were reiterating. Okay.
I don't remember that I said that was left to the last minute, Chairman.
Okay. Well, let's move on. Councillor Whittington. Thank you, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, very welcome the report. I mean, as somebody, I've lived in Grantham for over 50 years, and you know, we've seen some false dawns before about, you know, trying to regenerate the centre of Grantham. I appreciate going through the report that it's looking at the balance and the fact that high streets and town centres are changing. They're no longer going to be purely retail. There's going to be a large leisure aspect to them. There's going to be housing as well. They almost need to go back to the way they were in medieval times, when town centres were a mixture of shops and people lived there, and leisure facilities and inns and taverns and that sort of thing. So, and I think, and I take the point about the two out-of-town shopping centres, but I think they're catering potentially for a slightly different audience. You know, I certainly suspect the one that potentially is going to come to the south of Grantham is going to be more counting for day trippers. But getting back to it, the report does refer to it. So it's been the impact of the post-COVID world has been taken into account. I'm just wondering how post-COVID it is, because certainly what I'm picking up from stuff I've been reading is that potentially the entire future of the way we do things going forward, I think it's going to radically change. And I'm just wondering, given the time framework, just how post-COVID world proof this report actually is. And the most fundamental question of all, we've applied for 10 million quid. What are our chances of actually getting 10 million quid? Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Liz, if you can quickly address those two comments, please.
Yes. So for the first question, I think COVID-19, the impact of that is going to be felt in several ways. Obviously, there's going to be a national economic impact, and we will feel that locally. But as Richard was talking about earlier on, there is a local impact, which might be sector-based, and it might be specific to the sectors that are based in our local area. So we need to take that into consideration as well. So we're taking information from the national picture, from the Lincolnshire LEP, and from the survey that was recently undertaken by Invest SK, and that's all being distilled and will be included in the report. I think MHCLG are particularly worried about market engagement, as in the private sector involvement in the schemes that we're taking forward. So we're addressing that within the final business case as well, and explaining how we're going to mitigate any risk that's related to that market engagement. There are also positives to the COVID-19 situation. And I think in terms of shopping locally and wanting more of a community base is definitely coming out in terms of trends, and that might have a positive impact on the use of our town centres. So we're sort of taking that into account, but you're quite right. It's at an early stage at the moment.
Okay, that's fine. I think it's perhaps a bit of an unfair question to ask the officer to crystal ball gaze as to the probability of us getting this. But I think that likewise, I mean, I'm hopeful as you are that we have we've done as much as we can to get as best possible chance of this.
If I just quickly
to return.
Is it possible, Mr. Chairman, just to say one word?
Please.
Cycling, and how can we? Cycling is on the increase. How can we build this into the plan? And I'm talking about making cycling safe for people, and also stores, safe, secure stores where they can store their bikes. Because the big fear of people who cycle is the bike's going to be pinched. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think that point's noted, and again, I think that a lot of these points are substantiating the earlier observation that the Economic Development Committee of the Council should really have been engaged at an earlier stage. I'm going to come in with some comments as well. I think it's. I should declare.
Come back a bit later on. Could I come back with a couple of questions when you finish, please?
Yeah, that this is an ambitious and a bold. There's a bold project. There's a lot of work gone into this. I think it would be next to impossible to spend £27 million on the centre of Grantham and not see an improvement, even after the consultants have had their cut. So I welcome it. I'm pleased about the work that's gone into it, and I'm grateful for it. Councillor Adams, if you can make your comments and questions brief, please.
It is a very quick question, Chairman. What collaboration has there been with the county? Excuse me, the county council. We have a Grantham transport board or transport project board. I hope this is not being done in isolation, but there is full collaboration. It would be a bit silly for the county council to be looking at one area for Grantham and this to be going down a different route altogether. Just a quick reassurance that there's been full collaboration with the county.
Chairman, can I just answer that?
Please do, Councillor Dobson.
Yeah, no, we are in full consultation with Richard Davis, who is leading that other meeting and that group, and we are looking at that in parallel.
Okay, I'm grateful for those comments, and thank you for all of the work that's gone into this. As I say, I think the point is noted that we should have been involved earlier, but I think that we can put ourselves as a stakeholder going forward in this process.
I think so. You've only had a few FedCo meetings, though, haven't we?
Sure, of
so
course.
We couldn't get it all in. I think that's a good vehicle, and we should have, of course, if it had been there
Okay.
in place before.
Moving on, I'd like to move on. Thank you for that presentation, Liz. I apologise we didn't have more time to go through it in lower level detail, but the report was, in my opinion, excellent. Moving on to the work programme. We've added a lot to the work programme today, as I sensed would happen on the financial outturn. I thank all members for their involvement on that. Mark and I will meet separately to discuss that. I suggest if there's a lot that's been brought up today, if you have anything that you want to add to the work programme, please email it to Mark and myself, and we'll meet between now and the next meeting to review that. Councillor Dilks, you have a point, please.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, you moved on quickly on the. Is our recommendation on the future High Street Fund to support the submission and to regret that we were not involved earlier? Is that what we've decided? I kind of missed it.
Okay, thank you. I will return then, if you want to return to that article. I sense that the majority of the comments on this were positive, other than the fact that we weren't engaged earlier, number one. And number two, I think your point about the governance of the town team is a critical one. So those 2 points incorporated, we are happy to support it because the general tone and comments were positive. Does anybody else disagree with that? No, thank you. I'm going to move on. So I'm going to move on to the final point, which is any other business. Is there anybody in the committee that has any other business?
May I come in, Chairman, please? I know from the work programme our next meeting is not till September. Could members of the committee have the action notes and minutes of this meeting well before that, not just to be included with the agenda 2 or 3 days or whatever time before, but sort of a month or so before, so we can actually follow these up with you. And we've spent quite a lot of time sort of looking at the action notes, etc. It might be possible to do that outside of the meeting by getting the notes. And
thank you for that, Bob. Senior, do you want to comment on that?
Sorry, can I just clarify? Our next meeting is due to be held on the 28th of July.
I beg your pardon, Chairman. I'm looking at. I didn't spot that one. Yeah. Well,
thank you for that clarification. Let's move on. Does anybody else have any other business? Okay, it is.
Sorry, Chairman. Could I have a commitment? Do we get those minutes and action notes earlier, please?
I think that Karen, in the conversations that were the broken conversation, was committing to the best of their abilities to get agendas to us sooner and earlier. So I think we've had that commitment, actually, Councillor Adams, but thank you for reiterating it. So it's now 1:17 and my stomach tells me it's lunchtime. So thank you all for your time today. I'm grateful for your time. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you, Karen.
Thanks, everybody. Cheers. Thanks.
Bye-bye.